Ladies and gentlemen, the international conference is about to start. I have a few notes to make before we begin our conference. First, I would like to seek your cooperation in completing this conference. Kindly mute your microphone to avoid interruption. Thank you very much for your kind attention and cooperation. Om Swastiastu. Tabe salamat lingguna latai, salam sahujud karene malempang. Adil Katalino, Bacuramin Kasaruga, Basengat Kajubata. Arus, arus, arus. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, namo buddhaya, salam kebajikan, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Respectable Director of Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tapung Penyang Palangkaraya, or the representative. Honorable Vice Rectors, Honorable the excellent speakers for this international conference, Mrs. Lina Sakina Salim, BA, MA, the Senior Executive Harmony Center, MUIS, Islamic Religious Council of Singapore. Mr. Igusti Agung Wardana, SH, LLM, PhD, the Assistant Professor at Department of Environmental Law Faculty, Universitas Gajah Mada. And Mrs. Dr. Dewi Bunga, SH, MH, the Criminal Law at Universitas Hindu Negeri Igusti Bagus Sugriwa Denpasar. Honorable Director of Graduate Program or the representative. Honorable Vice of Deans of Dharma Sastra Faculty, IAHN-TP Palangkaraya. Honorable all guests and all participants of this international conference. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first international conference on law of Dharma Sastra with the title, The Recent Challenges and Opportunities Upcoming 5.0 Era on Wednesday, August 10, 2022. My name is Putu Paramita, your Master of Ceremony for this international conference. And to begin with, allow me to read the agenda for our opening ceremony. First is the listening of the Indonesia National Anthem. Second, praying. Third, speech by the chairman of the committee. Fourth, the welcoming speech from the Vice Dean of the Academics and Student Affairs of Dharma Sastra Faculty, and we kindly request Ibu to lead this international conference officially open, and will be followed by photo session at the last program. The honorable distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to honor our country, let us all rise for the listening of the Indonesia National Anthem, Indonesia Raya. Ladies and gentlemen, may I request all of you to stand. Thank you very much. Please be seated. The next agenda is praying for Ibu Natalia Susilawati. Please proceed to the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me lead the prayer using Indonesia. Om Swastiastu. Tabe selamat linguna latai, salam sujud kerende melempang. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Bapak Ibu hadirin sekalian, untuk memperlancar kegiatan kita pada pagi hari ini, marilah kita bersama-sama berdoa. Pada kesempatan ini saya pimpin menggunakan secara Hindu lokal yang ada di Kalimantan Tengah. Marilah kita bersama-sama berdoa malam. Palus inanjuri kubahing ganan tandak balua bulau pantar tatah banjung rabia sedurin guntung. Bahing penganak andau belau parung hayu mengkapit sebulan taruang digantung kahlenjang bahing bulan yang aku ampun tilap 30. Tasik penyun manjung sampai penulisan ranyi hatalan yo tingang satu ranyi hatalalangit uang ketika tu ike tingang esum dan hukuman PT Aula Fakultas Dharma Sastra dan Internasional Fakultas Dharma Sastra pelaku ranying hatala menyeluruh ike handiai tuntang memberkat dan membimbing ike handiai mangat kegiatan ike tahu berjalan berawal pertengahan hingga berakhir karya berjalan dengan lancar jatun halangan apapun yoyo tingang tatu ranying hatala arebewe pelakuan ike namun ike duli menyaut ike perice tapi ike yakin dan percaya tagal kuasa jahai ike mengetahuan kehendak ike samandiai. Dia panjang ribu terawih jamban bahing ganan tanda ku palus buli ganan tanda ku buli batambang selumpuk entang mulang nantakep dan terus goyang. Puruk hamberuan ike buli kepintar keharati penyelembang untek narang ate perintah serawe perlu jaran perajam hukum. Buli hayak tua rajaki umur aseng panjang. Uang aram tuntang kuasam ijihai ike berlaku sahi.
Ladies and gentlemen, now we move to the next agenda, is speech by the chairman of the committee, Mrs. Srikayun SH MSE. Please proceed to the stage.
Om Swastiastu. Tabe selamat liguna latai, salam sujud kerende melempang. Shalom, namo budaya, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Mohon izin menyampaikan laporan kegiatan seminar internasional menggunakan bahasa Indonesia. Yang terhormat Rektor Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya yang mewakili, yang kami hormati dan kami banggakan Bapak Ibu narasumber yang hadir pada hari ini. Yang kami hormati Wakil Rektor 1, 2, dan 3 IAHN-TP Palangkaraya. Yang kami hormati Direktur Pasca Sarjana IAHN-TP Palangkaraya yang mewakili. Yang kami hormati Dekan Fakultas Dharma Sastra yang mewakili. Dekan Fakultas Dharma Acarya, Dekan Fakultas Duta dan Brahma Widya. Yang kami hormati seluruh pejabat fungsional maupun administrasi yang tidak bisa kami sebutkan satu persatu. Dan yang kami hormati seluruh peserta seminar yang hadir pada hari ini. Kita panjatkan puji syukur kepada Ida Sang Hyang Widiwasya Ranjing Hatala Langit, Tuhan Yang Maha Esa. Karena atas asung kertawara anugerahanya lah kita dapat bertemu secara virtual pada hari ini melalui kegiatan Seminar Internasional Fakultas Dharma Sastra. Pada kesempatan ini, izinkanlah saya menyampaikan laporan kegiatan sebagaimana berikut ini. Latar belakang. Memasuki era 5.0 untuk menutupi kesenjangan hukum yang seharusnya sudah ada sejak era 4.0, yakni adanya aturan hukum yang memadai pada perangkat sistem elektronik untuk mengelola informasi elektronik secara otomatis. Adapun tantangan dan peluang bagi perguruan tinggi hukum atau semua pihak yang terlibat, termasuk dosen dan mahasiswa, diharapkan mampu mengikuti perkembangan teknologi, yang dimana di dalam kurikulum dan pembelajaran perguruan tinggi hukum dituntut harus mampu menyiapkan lulusan mahasiswa yang berpikir kritis, kreatif, serta mempunyai karakter yang dapat beradaptasi untuk menerima hal-hal baru termasuk perkembangan teknologi. Selain itu, kurikulum pada perguruan tinggi hukum juga harus mengajarkan sikap profesionalitas, integritas, dan nilai-nilai Pancasila, agar kelak ketika lulusan mahasiswanya menjadi aparatur penegak hukum, mereka tak hanya menguasai teknologi saja, namun juga mempunyai karakter yang baik. Tantangan mengenai pembelajaran, baik dosen dan mahasiswa, haruslah dapat mempunyai kemampuan untuk mengoperasikan teknologi guna kelancaran proses pembelajaran mengajar. Jadi berdasarkan uraian singkat serta permasalahan tersebut di atas, maka Fakultas Dharma Sastra IAHN-TP Palangkaraya bermaksud untuk melaksanakan kegiatan seminar internasional untuk memecahkan masalah terkait peluang dan tantangan penegak hukum di era 5.0. Adapun tujuan kegiatan pelaksanaan yaitu untuk mempertemukan para ilmuwan akademis penelitian dan ilmuwan penelitian terkemuka untuk bertukar dan berbagi pengalaman hasil penelitian tentang semua aspek hukum dan pendidikan tinggi. Meningkatkan pemahaman dan pengetahuan terkait tantangan dan peluang pada era 5.0 sehingga civitas akademika mampu memahami dan melihat peluang dan tantangan di era 5.0. Membuka pikiran dan peningkatan kepedulian terhadap isu-isu atau permasalahan mengenai tantangan dan peluang pada era 5.0. Adapun dasar pelaksanaan kegiatan Seminar Internasional Fakultas Dharma Sastra berdasarkan keputusan Dekan Fakultas Dharma Sastra IAHN-TP Palangkaraya nomor B-DK-FDS-PP-00-9-01-2022. Adapun peserta kegiatan seminar internasional berjumlah 480 orang, yang dimana dari unsur dosen, administrasi, dan mahasiswa. Adapun sumber dana kegiatan seminar internasional ini berasal dari DIPA IAHN-TP Palangkaraya. Demikianlah laporan ini disampaikan. Dan sebelum mengakhiri laporan ini, dimohon dengan hormat nantinya kepada Bapak Dekan Fakultas Dharma Sastra yang diwakili kepada Wakil Dekan 1 nanti untuk menyampaikan sambutan sekaligus membuka kegiatan seminar internasional Fakultas Dharma Sastra. Akhir kata, saya atas nama panitia memohon maaf sebesar-besarnya apabila ada pelaksanaan kegiatan ini nantinya ada kesalahan dan kekurangannya. Atas perhatiannya kami ucapkan terima kasih. Om Santi Santi Om Sahei. Palangkaraya, 10 Agustus 2022. Ketua Panitia Sri Kayun Esa, MSI.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next agenda, it is the welcome remarks from the Vice Dean of the Academics and Student Affairs of Dharma Sastra Fakulti IAHN-TP Palangkaraya, Ibu Mariati SAG MSI, and this conference will be officially open. Mrs. Mariati, please proceed to the stage.
Tabe selamat lingkungan latai. Salam sahujud terendam lempang. Om Swastiastu. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Salam kebajikan. Pertama-tama izinkanlah saya menyampaikan sambutan Dekan Fakultas Dharma Sastra Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya menggunakan bahasa Indonesia. Pertama-tama kami sampaikan permohonan maaf di mana dalam webinar internasional ini yang seyogianya Bapak Dekan yang menyampaikan kata sambutan. Namun beliau tidak bisa hadir di tengah-tengah kita karena beliau adalah pada saat ini cuti. Dengan tidak mengurangi dari makna, izinkanlah kami menyampaikan kata sambutan. Yang terhormat Bapak Rektor Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya, yang kami hormati Ibu Wakil Rektor Bidang Akademik dan Pengembangan Kelembagaan, Bapak Wakil Rektor Bidang Administrasi Umum, Perencanaan dan Keuangan, Bapak Wakil Rektor Bidang Kemahasiswaan dan Kerjasama, Bapak Kepala Biro Administrasi Umum, Akademik dan Keuangan, Bapak Dekan Fakultas Dharma Acarya, Bapak Dekan Fakultas Dharma Duta dan Brahma Widya, Bapak Direktur Program Pasca Sarjana Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya, Bapak Wakil Dekan 2 Fakultas Dharma Sastra, Kepala Lab Fakultas Dharma Sastra. Yang kami hormati para narasumber. Pertama, I Gusti Agung Made Wardana, Asisten Profesor di Lingkungan Fakultas Hukum Universitas Gadjah Mada. Yang kedua, Dr. Dewi Bunga SHMH, Dosen Hukum Pidana Universitas Hindu Negeri I Gusti Bagus Sugriwa. Yang ketiga, Lina Sakinah Salim, BA, MA, Senior Aktivis Harmony Center Islamic Religious Council of Singapore. Kami ucapkan selamat datang dan terima kasih kepada ketiga narasumber. yang telah berkenan memenuhi undangan kami dalam webinar internasional Fakultas Dharma Sastra Institut Agama Indo Negeri Tampung Penyang, Palangkaraya. Begitu pula peserta webinar internasional yang kami hormati. Selamat bergabung dalam webinar internasional ini. Diiringi dengan rasa syukur yang mendalam, dengan memanjatkan puji astungkara kehadapan Sang Hyang Widiwasa, Ranying Hatala Langit, Tuhan Yang Maha Esa. Karena atas asungkerta waranugrahanya, pada hari ini bersama-sama dapat menghadiri acara webinar internasional Fakultas Dharma Sastra Institut Agama Indo Negeri Tampung Penyang, Palangkaraya. Seminar internasional ini adalah seminar yang pertama bagi Fakultas Dharma Sastra dengan mengetengahkan sebuah tema, Direction, Selective, and Openness. Melalui tema ini, kita tingkatkan, kita ingin mengupas tentang baru-baru ini dan peluang yang akan datang di era 5.0. Ini berkaitan dengan perkembangan penegakan hukum terhadap permasalahan yang berkaitan dengan perkembangan zaman yang begitu pesat, maju dengan kecanggihan teknologi yang sebagian besar masyarakat harus ikut mengimbangi perkembangan zaman ini. Namun di sisi lain, perkembangan zaman juga harus tetapi dibentengi dengan peraturan-peraturan yang kemudian dilanjutkan dengan penegakan hukumnya agar tantangan dan peluang masa depan tetap berada di koridor hukum yang harus ditaati dan ditegakkan. Kita menyadari bahwa revolusi industri 4.0 telah bergeser ke paradigma society 5.0. Paradigma yang berubah ini tentu membawa tantangan dan peluang tersendiri bagi masyarakat. Masalah yang dihadapi seperti terkait dengan aspek perlindungan hukum dan pengelolaan data pribadi. Perlindungan dan pengelolaan perlu ditingkatkan karena society 5.0 ini merupakan sebuah masyarakat yang berpusat pada manusia yang menyimbangkan kemajuan ekonomi dan teknologi dengan menyelesaikan masalah melalui sistem yang mengintegrasikan dunia maya dan ruang fisik atau dunia nyata. Menghadapi era society 5.0 dibutuhkan kemampuan agar tidak terjadi pertentangan dan pelanggaran karena peluang dan tantangan masa depan. Suka tidak suka, mau tidak mau, semua orang harus mengikuti sepanjang tidak terjadinya pelanggaran dalam perkembangan teknologi. Kami dari Fakultas Dharma Sastra menyambut baik dengan diselenggaranya webinar internasional ini. Panitia sudah menghadirkan para pakar atau narasumber yang akan menguraikan, menjelaskan, dan mengupas tentang tantangan dan peluang yang akan datang di era 5.0 ini. Melalui webinar internasional ini, mari kita sharing, kita berargumentasi, berdiskusi, membedah mengupas dan memaknai bagaimana strategi menghadapi tantangan dan peluang yang akan datang di era 5.0 ini. Saya atas nama Dekan Fakultas Dharma Sastra mengucapkan terima kasih atas kerjasama dan semangat yang dimiliki panitia pelaksana sehingga webinar internasional ini dapat terlaksana sesuai dengan jadwal. Semoga webinar internasional ini memberikan rekomendasi positif dalam menghadapi tantangan dan peluang di era 5.0 ini. Demikian kata sambutan yang dapat saya sampaikan dengan memanjatkan doa kepada Yang Widiwasa Ranying Hatala Langit Tuhan Yang Maha Esa. Dan dengan mengucapkan Om Awing Namastu Namasidam, Om Sodiratu Tat Astu, Om Anu Barda Pratawu Yanto Wisa Swasta. Dan izin dengan sahur perapah antang patahu Kota Palangkaraya, seminar webinar internasional pada hari ini tanggal 10 Agustus 2022 dinyatakan dibuka. Demikian sambutan Dekan Fakultas Dharma Sastra tertanda Dr. Imade Pastama SH MA. Sekian dan terima kasih. Saya iri dengan Pramasanti. Om Santi 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 Om Sahi. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua.
Thank you very much, Ibu, for the very warm welcome and opening this conference. Now the first international conference on law of Dharma Sastra is officially open. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, for documentation, we kindly request the participant joining via Zoom to open your camera and the honorable guest in the room to have a photo session, please. Well, thank you very much for, we already take a picture. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to the keynote session, we will have a break for 5 minutes.
Jadi kita 25. Nah, saya kan kemarin saya balik lagi ke kantor. Ternyata kan belum 1 minggu. Nah, jadi akhirnya tanggal Senin nggak bisa. Jadi tuh. Ya, upload aja ya. Nah. Ya. Iya. Jadi saya sampaikan.
Terdepan dalam pelaksanaan Tridharma perguruan tinggi, yaitu pendidikan, penelitian, dan pengabdian kepada masyarakat.
Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya memiliki 13 prodi yang telah terakreditasi oleh BAN PT, 10 prodi S1, 3 prodi program pasca sarjana, dengan fasilitas yang lengkap dan representatif, dosen yang profesional, kompeten, dan bersertifikat, biaya SPP yang murah, serta ada beasiswa bagi yang berprestasi maupun yang tidak mampu. Kuliah pun jadi aman, nyaman, dan terjamin. Selain itu, ada juga berbagai macam kegiatan akademik dan non-akademik, seperti kegiatan seminar nasional dan internasional bersertifikat yang diisi oleh berbagai narasumber berkompeten dari seluruh Indonesia maupun dari luar negeri, program pengabdian kepada masyarakat oleh mahasiswa, atau pengabdian dosen dengan mahasiswa.
Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya berkomitmen untuk mencetak generasi Hindu yang unggul, profesional, dan religius.
Saya sangat bangga berkuliah di Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya karena Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya memberikan saya begitu banyak pengalaman, ilmu, serta skill yang belum pernah saya dapatkan sebelumnya. Selain itu, Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya juga memberikan fasilitas yang setara dengan kampus unggulan lainnya. Kemudian dosen-dosen yang sudah tersertifikasi, karena selama saya berada di Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya, saya mendapatkan ilmu yang sangat bermanfaat seperti pendidikan luar sekolah dan teknik dalam mengajar dan masih banyak lagi. Kemudian support berupa beasiswa PPA dan KIP kuliah.
Saya alumni Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya tahun 2008, lulusan predikat cum laude. Saya sekarang bekerja di Kementerian Agama Kota Palangkaraya sebagai penyuluh agama Hindu. Saya bangga menjadi alumni Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya yang memiliki visi unggul, profesional, dan religius.
Saya alumni IAHN Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya, lulus tahun 1996, yang masih berstatus Tah Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya. Saya bekerja menjadi pengawas agama Hindu tingkat dasar dan menengah di kantor Kementerian Agama Kota Palangkaraya. Saya bangga menjadi alumni IAHN Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya yang memiliki visi unggul, profesional, dan religius. Ayo kepada generasi muda lulusan SMA dan SMK Kementerian Tengah agar melanjutkan studinya ke IAHN Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya.
Ayo kuliah di Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya. Jangan pilih yang lain. Tetaplah menjadi mesin pencetak sarjana yang sujana, sarjana yang berguna bagi negara, agama, dan keluarga.
Ayo kuliah di Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya, unggul, profesional, religius.
Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang Palangkaraya, unggul, profesional, religius.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, now we will begin to the keynote sessions of this international conference. Mrs. Nimade Anggi, MPD, will be the moderator to lead this session. I will make a brief introduction about Mrs. Anggi. Mrs. Anggi was born in Ramayana, November 26, 1990. Mrs. Anggi, her education background is Master of English Education in Universitas 11 Maret, and she is listed currently as a lecturer at Dharma Sastra Faculty IAHN-TP Palangkaraya since 2021. Mrs. Anggi has many experiences for the past 5 years. She has joined some events. The recent one is the 67th Teflon International Virtual Conference with the paper title Authentic Assessment in Curriculum 2013 at Al-Azhar Siva Budi Junior High School in Solo. And as an independent researcher and lecturer, Mrs. Anggi has many publications. The recent one is the challenges of using Trefinger learning model in improving speaking. Mrs. Anggi, please, time is yours.
Okay, thank you to Master Ceremony, the time and the place. Tabi selamat linggu nalatai, salam sahujud karenda malempang. Om. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, namo buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Adil Katalino, Bacuramin Kasaruga, Basengak Bata. Arus, arus, arus. the respectable Director of Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang, Palangkaraya, Honorable Vice Rector, Honorable and excellent speakers for this international conference, Mrs. Lina Sakina Salim, BA, MA, Mr. Igusti Agung Wardana, SH, LLM, PhD, and Mrs. Dr. Dewi Bunga, SH, MH. The Honorable Vice of Dean, Dharma Sastra Faculty, NTP Palangkaraya, ladies and gentlemen, I am Nimade Anggi, your moderator for this conference. I'm very pleased to see you here and welcome all of you to this conference. Today's conference is about the recent challenges and opportunities upcoming 5.0 era. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have already three excellent speakers. They are Mrs. Lina Sakina Salim BA MA from Singapore, Mr. Igusti Agung Madewardana SH LLM PhD from Gajah Mada University, and the last is Mrs. Dr. Dewi Bunga SH MH from Dr. Igusti Bagus Sugriwa Denpasar Universitas Hindu Igusti Bagus Sugriwa Denpasar Bali. Sorry, Mrs. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin the presentation, let me inform how the presentation will be going on. First of all, all the speaker will be invited to present the material. After that, there will be question and answer section, and followed by the conclusion or the closing statement by each speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, now let's begin the presentation. Now allow me to call the first speaker, Mrs. Lina Sakina Salim, BA, MA. How are you, Mrs.?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, of course, it's clear.
Okay.
Okay, before Mrs. Lina Sakina Salim start to present her material, let me tell you a bit about her. Mrs. Lina Sakina Salim BAMA is the Senior Executive of Harmony Center with Islamic Council of Singapore, and she also actively joined several conferences such as the Center of Interfaith Understanding International Women's Day discussion in 2021 in Singapore, and also in 2020 she joined the conference King Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz Center in Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue Fellowship Program in Sri Lanka, and the last in Abu Dhabi. She joined the first International Young Forum of TWMCC in 2019, building future reader, commitment, integrity, and innovation. Okay, Mrs. Salim, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Salam sejahtera, selamat pagi, dan Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. I will be delivering my presentation in English, but I will also add a bit in Bahasa as much as I can. So I will begin my presentation by sharing the slides. I've prepared a slides about the presentation that I will be doing. So if you can please wait for a while I bring the slides up. Okay, so my slides is up. Can everyone see my slide? Yes. Okay, all right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, so today for the presentation, I will be talking about a topic that is not directly linked to law itself, but I will touch a bit about law. My topic for today is regarding religious diversity. So managing religious diversity in multi-religious Singapore. So between the hard and soft approaches. So when I say hard and soft approaches, I'm referring to what has the government done to maintain and manage religious diversity through laws and policy, and also through national programs and soft approaches towards pushing this narrative into society. So I will first start by describing about the situation in Singapore, past and present, and then we will look at what are the contemporary issues that we are facing, and see what has been done and what can be done in future to further manage the development in society. So my presentation will focus more on society and religion, because that's where I'm coming from. I come from Harmony Center. Harmony Center is an interfaith center that is under MUIS. And MUIS is a statutory board under the government. So if you can look at our logo here, we actually have the logo of the Singapore flag here. This is to indicate that we are part of the government. And although we are kind of, you can see as an indirect way of the government promoting religious diversity from the Muslim community, because MUIS is essentially the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore. Okay, so I will first begin by introducing to you how the society is in Singapore. So I think that many of us here are familiar with Singapore. You may have heard things about Singapore. You may have even visited Singapore. You may have family and friends in Singapore. Like I do also have family and friends in Indonesia. We are interconnected because we are part of the Nusantara. And so in religion-wise, one thing to note is that the area in the world that we are in Nusantara, right, we have a lot of religious diversity that is not found elsewhere, that is not found in other parts of the world. When I say not found, it means that the kepesatan religious diversity is not there. It's not as much as what you can see here. So for example, if you can look at the picture that I have provided here, right, we have religious leaders. They are together reciting a prayer, and they are all a representative of the IRO, or the Interreligious Organization of Singapore. And so under this Interreligious Organization of Singapore, we have 10 representatives, meaning that these 10 religions are acknowledged in this country and have representation. Their leaders are part of the council, members of this organization. This organization is not a government organization. It was in fact created in 1959, way before Singapore's independence in 1964. So it comes before the creation of Singapore itself. And so after Singapore is created, it continued to exist in Singapore. And in a way, the government paid homage and paid respect to this organization. But does that mean there's only 10 religions in Singapore? So the matter of fact is there is actually more than 100+ religions community that have registered in Singapore. So under the Pew Research Center, right, they have said that in 2010, Singapore is in fact the most religiously diverse country globally in comparison to other parts of the world. Despite having very small amount of people, there's only like around 5 million people, plus minus, but it's very multicultural and multi-religious. And over the years, this is, you can see, this is a statistic that is from 2020, so very recent. The distribution of the religious demographic, as you can see, there is no big majority, because the biggest amount goes to the Buddhist religion or the Buddhist community, but it is only around 30+%, followed by the Taoist or the Taoist community, followed by Christianity, and then Islam, and then Hinduism and other religion. And one thing to note is that over the years, the numbers does not really change as much. Some increase, some decrease, but the most number that is increasing is actually the group with no religion. So we are seeing, this is one of the contemporary issues that we are facing, that people are becoming non-religious. Not to say they are non-spiritual, they can claim to be spiritual, but they do not want to belong to any religion. So this is something that we are seeing, but it does not mean that it is creating a lot of changes in the way the other groups are existing. All right. So Singapore has no majority, but some may be influential than others, depending on their representation in the upper class society, in politics, and so on. Although Singapore maintains a very strict secularistic approach to maintaining and managing the country, but there are instances where some religious groups would have a bigger say than others. All right. And so Singapore is secular, secular meaning that they separate totally religion from the state, but religion matters. Religion matters to not only people, as you can see here, but religion also matters to Singapore. And I will explain later on how it is. But in a nutshell, right, in a summary, the government is involved in the management of the religious harmony and even in some of the religious affairs of some communities. Okay, so this is my introduction. So to understand how did Singapore become where we are now in 21st century, after 57 years of independence, we are what we are today. Very diverse. So where did this come about? So to make you further understand, I will actually present to you the past. So how did Singapore become Singapore as it is now? So before independence, like many countries around our area, right, around our region in Southeast Asia, we were under the colonial administration. For Singapore, we were under the British, similar to Malaya. At one part, we were part of Malaya itself. And so before the British came to Singapore, Singapore were largely a small community, very diverse in terms of, not very diverse, but it has always been active in trade. This, I think many would know how Singapore is part of the trade route of this area. And the majority that is present in Singapore are actually the native people in Singapore, which is you can say part of it is the native people or orang asli. We have the orang laut, orang asli, and then we also have the you would say Malay community, but Malay here in Singapore is very big. It's not how Malay would be understood in Malaysia and Indonesia. Malay here encompass all other sub-ethnic groups, and they are the Bugis, the Makassar, people from Java, people from Bawean, and so on. So all of these people, when they come to our area, they are considered as Malays. And so in the past, this group of communities have been here before the British came because of trade. And other than that, we also have the Chinese and also the Indian traders who set foot, and also the Arab merchants, and practically people from elsewhere. Yeah. And so when the British came, they changed a bit about how religion and race is presented in the society. One of the key policy that they have is the divide and rule, where they know and they are bringing, because when they came, they also brought in a lot of workers from colonies such as from China and India. And so that's how the number of Chinese increased incredibly from being a small minority in Singapore to become the big majority. And so it is through the British colonial policy of bringing them in that we have what we have today. But how did they manage? They divide and rule. So Singapore is a very small country. They divide each areas for the different communities so that they don't mix. There are many reasons to why they do that. One of the understanding is that the more people do not communicate, the better it is to actually monitor and manage them, because you are oblivion to other people's existence. Therefore, you wouldn't compare, contrast, you wouldn't say, hey, why is the British doing this to me? Why are they not doing this to you? So people are oblivious in that sense. But after independence, and if you are aware of how Singapore got its independence, we got our independence actually not from the British, but we got it from Malaya, or today we call it Malaysia. And so there are some political episodes that resorted to Singapore coming out of Malaysia. And so during this time, tensions were high between races. So we have actually racial riots that caused big number of deaths and severe injuries among the different communities that was instigated by, racial tension, comparing this over that. And so the idea that race and religion as important identity markers for the people in this region, in Singapore, in Malaysia, was very strong. They see themselves as a Malay first, a Chinese first, an Indian first, or a Muslim, a Taoist, a Buddhist, a Hindu, and so on. So it's very much interconnected. To be a Malay, people would automatically think that you are a Muslim. Being an Indian, automatically you are a Hindu, although there are many nuances towards that, and the community is actually much more diverse. And so when Singapore achieved independence, they need to create a new identity. The people that's already in Singapore were part of an identity under Malaya, where Malaya says that this country belongs to the native Bumiputra, and other people are immigrants. And so because of that, at the beginning of the creation of the country, the unifying factor between the different religious community, racial community is not strong. So Singapore has to do something. What can they do to glue people together, to understand that you are now Singaporean, you are now no longer seen as separate, but you are one. And so they propagate the idea of multiculturalism. Okay, and so multiculturalism is an ideology that informs people that you have to create an identity together based on something that you share, although by doing so, it does not mean that you discard your previous identity. It does not mean that you are no longer Chinese, Malay, Indian. You are also encouraged to preserve your cultural heritage, your tradition, and your religious identity. But the most important thing is national identity have to take precedence over race and religion. So this is, you can say, a top-down from the government to the ground of conscious effort and careful planning to create this identity for Singaporeans. And you can't just say, we make this law, therefore you have to follow it. As what we all know, law does not work that way. It's not just written on papers. You need to do something in order for the law to be accepted and implemented and respected by the people. And so how do they do it? So in the next part, you will see these are actually the tools. I call it the hard tools again, because it is in the form of very top-down, very direct policy, law, and so on. And so in order to create, to inculcate and to make the Singaporeans, the older Singaporeans, to understand, to make a shift of their paradigm, and also for the young Singaporeans to be brought up in such an understanding, they have to do these four things. So the first one is, after the establishment of the country, the Singapore Constitution in Article 15, it says that Singapore aims to protect religious freedom. And so what entails under the protection of religious freedom? To profess, to practice, and to propagate. So you can profess means you can say that I am part of a religion. You can also practice it openly, and you can also propagate. And in the Islamic term, we say make da'wah or call people to your religion. It is allowed in Singapore. So it is allowed to present yourself, represent your religion, and also call people to your religion. However, the biggest thing is that as long as you maintain public order, you do not affect public health and morality. So this is the first thing in paper, in law, that the country said you can do this, we are going to protect you. The next thing, it's not just enough to say it, you know, you need to also find a way to make everyone talk. Because if you don't talk, you don't understand. If you don't understand, you don't communicate. When you don't communicate, you don't interact. And if you don't interact, you are separated. So in order to bridge the gap, Singapore decided on one common language. Now, if you have been to Singapore, you would see that in Singapore, you have on the signboard, there are 4 languages. We have Malay, Chinese, Mandarin, we have Tamil, and we also have English. So these 4 is always seen on the signboards and everywhere in Singapore. So it means that this is a way of the government showing that your religious community, your racial community, your linguistic connection to certain race and religion is important, and we are acknowledging that. But English is first. So English is the language of administration and interaction. And why? Because to form a common identity through interaction. When you are able to speak to one another, you are able to understand. And when you are able to understand, you see their point of view. So this is what they intended. So the third one is, apart from constitution and common language, they also try to show that we will protect the religious minorities. So as I mentioned before, through the British colonization, the demographic of the society changed drastically from having a small minority Chinese to become a very big majority. So in today, there are around 70+% Chinese in comparison to only, I would say 20% Malay, and under that 10% would be the Indians and others. And so there's a very big shift, and therefore there needs to be a way for the country to also say we will protect the religious minorities and the minorities' rights. So over here, you can see here we have MUIS, HAB, and Central Sikh Gurdwara. So MUIS is, as I said in the beginning, right, in Singapore, if you think about Malay, the understanding is it's interconnected with Islam. If you think about the Indians, it's interconnected with the Hindu. And when you think about Chinese, it's interconnected with the identity of being a Buddhist or a Taoist. And then Christianity just sits there, you know, because it embraces everyone. But the religious community that receive protection under the government is MUIS, Majlis Ugama Islam Singapura. We have the Hindu Advisory and Hindu Endowment Board, and the Sikh Gurdwara. So you can see here that the communities, the religious communities, are also from the minority racial communities. So why is it here, and why is it important for Singapore to actually maintain and safeguard minority religion? Is because they are also minority in race, minority in demographic, and whatever that happens to the community will also affect the religion. I'm a Muslim. I cannot say much for the Hindus and the Sikh in Singapore, but as Muslim in Singapore and Malay, religion and race is very much interconnected. It's very hard to say for Singaporeans, Malay, that you become a non-Muslim, because every cultural practices that we have is intertwined with the Islamic practices. So this is how the lay people would understand it. And therefore, to maintain the culture of the Malay in Singapore, includes maintaining the religion. So if you do not include maintaining the religion, you are not protecting the cultures of the Malays in Singapore. So that is how it is understood by the community, and therefore the government has to do something about it. Yeah. And the last one is maintaining religious harmony. So this is something that I will further talk about in my proceeding slides. Yeah. And so apart from this, okay, and so if we look here, these are hard tools. Another way of the government trying to do a top-down approach to embracing multiculturalism, but not so hard, it's through policies and national program. So this is to ensure a balanced representation of the main ethnic group. So in Singapore, people are categorized into 4: Chinese, Malay, Indian, and others. And everyone else can go under others. But Chinese would include all the sub-ethnic communities under Chinese. Malay, as I say, everyone under the sun in Nusantara area can be considered as Malay, although I think that is a very different understanding in Indonesia, right? A Malay is an ethnic community separated from the other sub-ethnic. I myself, I am Javanese and Bugis by blood, but I'm considered a Malay in Singapore. An Indian would put everyone under the sun who comes from South Asia, and others would be everyone else who does not have a representation. And so over here, I say balance because it's not equal. Equal means 1 to 1 to 1 to 1, right? But balance means they follow the demographic. So as I say, Chinese have 70%, therefore Chinese will get more. For example, in a group of 5, Chinese will get 3, and then 1 is for the Malay and 1 is for the Indian. So that's how this CMIO is understood. Yeah, and so this is diterapkan in the national programs such as in the housing development. So if you go to Singapore, you will see a lot of flats and apartments, right? And they are actually under the government. They are government housing. And so there is a policy that's called EIP that makes it an obligation for every level. So every tingkat, right? You will have this group. You will have a representation of the Chinese, of the Malays, and of the Indian as much as possible. They will not allow the level to have only Malays or only Chinese or only Indian. You have to be mixed. So apart from that, we also have something called race-based self-help groups. So these are self-help group that helps the community for financial assistance in education. One of the key fundamental thing that they help is actually in education. So giving financial assistance to students based on their racial groups, and also to give assistance to upskill for adults. And so these are also based on race. So CDAC is for the Chinese, SINDA is for the Indians, EA is for Eurasian. So Eurasian is also another term. Eurasian is a community where their ancestry is between the local Asian with the Western or the European blood. So the predominant Eurasian community here would actually have Portuguese and British blood, but more Portuguese in some sense. Yeah, and so Eurasian Association is another one. Eurasian, where does Eurasian comes from? Eurasian comes under others. Mendaki is for the Muslim, the Malays particularly, and MBMF is actually a Muslim fund for the mosque. So the thing about this is that it offers help to people, but it's based on your race. But some people, they don't really have one race. For example, Arab Muslim who is in Singapore that speaks Malay, that is part of the Malay community, they cannot receive help from Mendaki because they are not by race Malay. Because in our IC, national identification, we have race marker there. So if you speak Malay, you are part of the community, you mix around with the Malay people, it's just that your ancestry is Indian or Arab or even Chinese, you cannot get help from Mendaki. You have to go to SINDA, which is mostly Hindu, or you have to go to the other ones. So this is also something that is slowly changing. because if we look at if you will see the contemporary issues, there is a blurring of lines between the race and the religion. And I will talk about that later on, yeah? And so with the hard tools, these are some of the things that the government do from top down. But there are also soft tools that the government try to implement multiculturalism from ground up. Ground ups mean from the bottom going up, right? And so these are some of the key areas that they touch on. They create space, they create community, they give representation, they give support to ground up initiative, and they create a celebration for people to find a common identity, a common shared experience with. So these are some of the things that they have created. I have written here. So I'm going to just show you some pictures for you to understand better what it is about. So first we have the People's Association. They are under the government, and their sole purpose is to create a sense of identity that is shared by every community in Singapore. But how do they do that? They create a space. So in Singapore, every area in Singapore will have community center. So this is where all activities that is done within that neighborhood is done there. It is to promote a shared space. So everyone can come here to do whatever you want here, so that you don't arouse suspicion from different communities. You don't have your own space, you have shared spaces. So this is community centers. Group representative, as I mentioned, a part of giving the community a way to see that their community is being represented is that for every areas, you will have representative from different communities. So this is where I live. I live in an area called Aljunied, and if you see the bottom one is the government, the current government. The top one is actually the opposition party. My place is under the opposition party, but both parties have equal representation. We have someone from Indian community, someone from the Malay community, someone from the Eurasian community, and Chinese. So if you see out of the 5, 2 are Chinese, while 1 Indian, 1 Malay, and 1 Eurasian. Similarly, over here, we have actually 3 Chinese. Actually, we have 4 Chinese. We have 4 Chinese with 1 Malay. So at least 1 representation. Apart from that, they try to also create a sense of racial identity from the beginning, from school time. And so they create a celebration, a festival to be celebrated nationwide called Racial Harmony Day, that is celebrated on every 21st July. And children from kindergarten up to the secondary schools, right, up to the SMA, they will have to come to school in their own ethnic clothes or other people's ethnic clothes, and they celebrate things about race and religion. And apart from that, so this targets the student. What about adults? What about people who are already in the community? So they created this thing called IRCC, or Interracial Interreligious Confidence Circle, to promote interreligious and intercultural harmony or relationship. So this is a group of people that is situated under the community center, right? In every area, they will have this group, and they are leaders from society, business leaders, religious leaders, racial leaders, political leaders are all put in one group to promote better communication and interaction. So they do all sorts of activities like visiting people, having dialogues, and so on. But one thing to note is that all of this are not really deep. They only touch the surface. They only touch things that people see, but not actually what is inside and what is deeper and what is much more complex. And apart from this, we also have the MCCY Harmony Fund. So this MCCY is actually the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth. And this ministry provides a fund for the ground up initiatives, and also from the for the community. If you want to do something that's related to interreligious harmony, you can actually get money from us. We will fund your activity. So this is in a way how the government tries to also promote this idea, this ideology of multiculturalism. And a development is that Singapore is becoming more diverse. The racial group in Singapore is actually beyond CMIO. We have people, migrants that are coming to Singapore from all parts of the world. And so how do we actually ensure that people can understand the identity and the attitudes of the Singaporean community when they come into Singapore? So over here, we have the National Integration Council to bridge the Singaporean foreigner divide, because there have been and continue to have been tension between Singaporeans and the migrants. Xenophobia is actually quite prevalent in Singapore. People are blaming migrants for taking over job, for making the country expensive, and so on. And so the government is aware and acknowledge that this tension is there, and they need to actually help to make people understand and mitigate the damage that xenophobic sentiments can cause. And so this is where bridging them together, making people understand better the Singapore way. And apart from that, we also have the citizenship journey. So for people who wants to become Singaporeans, you will have to go through certain courses for you to understand what it means to be a Singaporean and to actually leave the identity that you are born with, your previous citizenship behind, and to embrace something exceptionally new. Although by race, you might be a Chinese from China, or an Indian from India, or even a Malay person from Indonesia or Malaysia or Brunei, and so on. Okay, so moving on. So now I will talk about the main hard tool that Singapore has that is known as the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act. And this is something that is very important to understand. How does Singapore deals with the multi-religious community is this. So this act was introduced in 1990, and this act is there. Why? Because the government feels that we need to do something, we need to regulate the religious interaction, the religious representation, the religious expression of the Singaporean society. And so this is seen as regulation of freedom of religion. Some people might say that, is this a restriction of religious freedom then? And because in the beginning, I already say national interest needs to be above race and religion. And Singapore actually, the kind of secularism that it practices is, to me, I understand it to be a practical or pragmatic secularism. It's not so hard to say religion does not have a place in society and and only needs to be in the private. But it says that you can be what you are, you can express yourself as long as you control yourself to a certain extent, that your expression, your representation is quite moderate and does not actually hinder the religious harmony or the harmony within society. So, but the question is, with restriction, does it mean that it will lead to hostilities by the religious group, or could it actually push people towards extremism? Meaning that if you don't allow people to be free in their religious practices, would people rebel against you? So global studies on restriction of religions have found out that in Singapore, it's not always the case, because they uses these two indexes. The first indexes is Government Restriction Index, which studies how much does a government in a country restrict the practices of a religious community. And the second one is Social Hostility Index, where they study how hostility is presented in society based on the restriction from religion, or from the state on to their religion. So in some countries, it is very linear in a way that the more the government restrict, the more rebellious the religious community becomes, the more hardline the religious communities become. But in Singapore, it's not always the case, because the more restriction the country poses, the hostility in society is actually quite moderate to low level if you want to compare to other parts of the world. But that does not mean that Singapore does not have any issue. It has a lot of issue, but it is not to the extent of bloodshed, to the extent of war, to the extent of civil war, and so on. And so in Singapore's case, to understand why is restriction important, these are some of the questions that we need to ask. Who is protected by the restriction? Scholars have argued that if Singapore does not pose any restriction, meaning like many parts of the Western society, it's free. The government does not have a say on anything. Scholars have argued that even if there is no direct hard loss by the state, there will always be a dominant group that will control the society in the way religion is presented. And this is by the dominant religious group or the dominant racial group or the dominant demographic. And so they will have a say. If the country does not say it, then they will have it. They will say what is normal, what is accepted. And so religious minorities are actually not protected if there is no restriction through the state. Another one is who is affected without the restriction, meaning to say, if the restriction in terms of law is not there, it does not mean that religious community is not affected at all. Because in other parts of the constitution, you also have many kinds of laws. For example, that I can say noise pollution laws. So noise pollution laws entails that you cannot pollute the noise in society, in the public, meaning to say certain religious processes, certain religious celebration can also actually be restricted. So you cannot have large procession and on the street because it will make noise outside and people will not be happy about it. Therefore, you can only have a small celebration in your religious community spaces, in the religious temples or in the mosque and so on. Another example that I can offer you is about the azan. So the azan that is being diluangkan di masjid, right? In Singapore, we cannot do it out in public in the open, because Muslims are minority, and therefore the azan can only be heard in the mosque itself because of noise pollution policy. So this is how, although you might not have certain restriction, direct restriction that says no azan cannot be made because of religion restriction, even though this is not here, noise policy act or noise pollution policy can also put a hindrance to it. And last is who will be indirectly affected, even though without restriction, as I mentioned already. Yeah, and so to understand how law helps to regulate multiple religious community, it's important to see if there's no law, what will happen? If there is law, what will happen? So under the Maintenance of the Religious Harmony Act, we actually have this idea that the government needs to help to maintain religious harmony. And this was officially introduced in 1990. So in order for us to understand how it came about, after 40 decades of our existence, Singapore gained independence in 1965, but only in 1990 they established this thing. So to understand, we need to see the context. So in the 1980s, late 1970s to the 1980s to the early 1990s, there was a global trend that affected many countries around the world. Following post-World War II, we have the fight for nationalism, we have the fight for independence, and after the independence, then this issue arises where there was a wave of religious reformation, and the religious community in Singapore was also affected. The Christian community, the Muslim community in particular. For the Christian community, during this time, Christianity increases its its control, or not control, but its community in Singapore, it gained a substantial amount of followers within this short span of time, especially among the middle class to the higher class of the society, among the Chinese and Indian, not so much from the Malay community. And so this means that people are actively promoting their religion. And afterwards, what it means is that in the other side, we see Singaporean Muslim becoming much more religious because of the development in the Middle East, in the development in Iran, for example. They have the religious reformation revolution, right? It affected the Muslim community in Singapore, people becoming more aware of how Muslims should behave, how Islam should be projected in society. So suddenly people are wearing hijab. In the past, people don't wear hijab as much, or they only cover only the hair, but suddenly people are wearing niqab, people are wearing long hijab. You have groups in schools, in universities that propagate Islamic values, and suddenly there is a decrease in religious and racial interaction. The Muslim community retreated from the public, saying that we can no longer eat with you because you are eating non-halal food. We cannot sit in the same table. We cannot sit in the same table if someone is drinking alcohol. We cannot be in the same space if this and that. So the government suddenly see this whole chaotic happenings in the community, and they feel that this is actually needed for them to create something, to put a direction to it. Yeah. And so what it means is that it inhibits, or rather it says that it restricts politicization of religion. So people that are representative of the religion, whether you are priests, you are religious teachers, you are religious leaders in all the religious community, you cannot use politics as part of your delivering religious deliverance in your community, either in public or in private. And so if you include political causes, if you excite disaffection against the state, if you cause hostility among religious groups in the things that you say in your khutbah, in your masses, then the government will take charge. And so this is the reason why this maintenance of religious harmony was introduced in 1990. But to date, right, in 2021 today, or rather in 2022, it has never been used at all. Okay, it's there. It is expressive way of law, but it is not used yet, because under it we also have under certain other ways of how the government actually controls. So under the Religious Harmony Act, we have the Sedition Act. So this falls under penal code, meaning to say that if you go against this, you can actually be charged by fine or even imprisonment up to 5 years. So this means that under the Sedition Act, you will be criminalized for causing ill will and hostility among different races and classes. So there are people who have been charged with Sedition Act for posing negative sentiments about the other religion in social media, in blogs, in their religious sermons, and so on. All right, and so now I will go into the contemporary issues. So these are some of the contemporary issues that are happening. I've touched a bit here and there some of the things already, such as the increased number of the non-religious. In Singapore, the non-religious are also considered part of the religious community because they register themselves, and in the interfaith or interreligious circle, there is a call to include them more and more. So people that belongs from the humanist society, they are also saying that we have a say in this whole field, and you need to include us when you are talking about religion. So then it makes a question about how can the community or the state control religion if there's an increase of the non-religious? What about the non-religious? How can you control the non-religious? What if the non-religious leaders also incite hate and hostility towards the religious community? What can the state do? So this is the first thing that is rising at the moment. Second is blurring lines beyond CMIO. This also mentioned previously. And then we also have the rising conservatism from regional and global influence. We have deeper and uncontrolled social media influences. So if I can proceed a bit more on what has been done. So in 2009, this Religious Harmony Act has been further revised, and the amendments is they understood that because of social media influence, the world becomes borderless, and the communities in Singapore does not only take heat from the local religious leaders, and so foreign influences can also in fact affect the community. And with that, the government say, if you want to have foreign influences in the religious community in Singapore, it needs to be managed. You need to declare that to the state who is involved. You need to declare how many donation is given, so that religious communities is not affected by the regional development. Apart from it, they understood that, you know, using hard tools doesn't really help people to understand. It creates fear. It creates fear in a sense that, oh, if I don't do this because I fear that the government will catch me. It's not because, oh, I don't do this because I respect. And therefore, they try to introduce this thing called the Committee Remedial Initiative, whereby people who has done seditious action and are caught to do seditious action, instead of charging them straight away, they are actually made to do remedial initiative to learn about the other religious community, to learn about the other racial community. And this is how they try to further update with the rising development of the time. And so if you see, these are some of the things that have happened in Singapore. Part of controlling external influences, they have put limitations to who can actually come into the country to propagate and to teach the religion. So and it goes both ways, not just for done towards the Muslim community, but also towards the Christian, towards the Buddhist, and so on. So whoever that creates contentious among religious group, they will not be able to enter, or if they are already here, they will be deported back to their home countries, such as what happened to this imam and what happens to the other imam from, for example, Mufti Meng from Zimbabwe, this Ustaz from Malaysia, and Ustaz Abdul Samad from Indonesia. They are not allowed to enter because of their holdings. And similarly, we have Christian pastors and Christian priests from other parts of the world that wants to come in. They are not allowed to come in because of their rhetorics. Christian pastors from Singapore itself are forced to, are made to apologize. If not, they will be charged, and so on. So over here, and the last part before I actually end, because I believe that my time is already up, is on POFMA, or the Protection of Online Falsehood and Manipulation Act. So with the rise of the uncontrolled social media influences, how can the country actually protect its people from fake news? And so this is introduced in 2019, and it prevents the electronic communication of falsehood, and it place various measures to counteract the effect of such communication. So it's not just catching people who spread falsehood, it is also checking onto the social media platform, websites online that will also pose danger of promoting fake news. But there are also questions that arises, and criticism that arises from POFMA is because it is based on interpretation of what is considered opinion and what is considered as falsehood in truth. Because it has no clear definition. What does it mean by opinion? So for example, if there are the opposition party that say majority Chinese population in Singapore that is not ready for a non-Chinese prime minister, is that based on fact? Is that an opinion? Can it be said out about? Is it considered as fake news or is it not? So this is some of the things that becomes a question mark. The other question mark, the other criticism is the government has full say and full control of this. So does it mean that anything, any dissatisfaction or any criticism about the government will also be made as falsehood? So where is the religious, where is the freedom of speech, and where is the freedom for us to voice out our dissatisfaction? So there are I would say responses from the community when this law was actually, this act was actually introduced and passed in the parliament. And so I think as a conclusion, I think my time is up. If you can see that these are what the country or the state tries its best to attain some of the control in managing the development of the technology, the development of outside of technology itself, but as an indirect impact or indirect impact towards the rapid development of technology. How does all of these changes impact the religious community and the social harmony in the country itself? I actually have a bit more to share about my own places, but I think we can have this later during the Q&A. With that, thank you so much for listening, and I welcome any questions that people may have during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sakina Salim, for giving such as informative and interesting presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's come to the second speaker, Mr. Igusti Agung Wardana, SHLM, PhD. Hello, Mr.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Good morning, everyone. Yes, it's clear enough.
Okay, before we start the presentation from Mr. Agung, let me tell you a bit about him. He is an assistant professor at Department of Environmental Law, Faculty of Law, Gajah Mada University, Indonesia. His research interest in socio-legal study, environmental law, comparative law, law and development, social movement, and spatial planning, law government, and he got his Master of Law in Environmental Law from University of Nottingham, UK, and the Doctoral of Philosophy in Asian Study from Murdoch University, Australia, and now he is in German. Is that true, Mr.? For postdoctoral degree, right?
Yes, I'm currently in Heidelberg, Germany. I'm working
Thank
as
you
a
so much.
research fellow at the Max Planck Institute.
Okay, thank you very much for attending this conference. Actually, in German, it's still in the morning, Mr. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 5 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
actually.
5 o'clock. Thank you so much for your participation. Okay, without further ado, please welcome Mr. Igusti Agung Wardana, SHLM, PhD. Time is yours.
Thank you, Anggi, for the generous introductions. Good morning, everyone. Please allow me to share my screen. Is it visible?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. Once again, good morning, everyone. Good morning, so very early from Heidelberg, Germany. And thank you so much for the committee of the Dharma Sastra Faculty International Conference, Institute Agama Hindu Palangkaraya, for inviting me to this talk at this conference. It's really a great pleasure to join this conference. The title of my talk this morning is Navigating the Anthropocenes, an invitation to legal scholars in the current predicament. I think that this would be a good theme to talk about because we still believe that the state of the earth that we are living now is similar to that of our grandparents live on. In fact, we are living in a very different world, not only in terms of technological advancement, as you might see, industrial revolution 4.0, but also the state of the environment has changed significantly from what we used to know as well. And we are entering a new geological epoch, what the earth scientists call as the Anthropocene. Hence, in this talk, I would like to look at how this new epoch has come about and how Indonesian legal scholars should play their role in navigating the Anthropocene. The word Anthropocene was popularized by Paul Crutzen, a Nobel Prize winning chemist, during a meeting in Mexico in 2000s. He felt upset because geologists participating in the meeting kept calling the geological epoch in the 21st century as the Holocene, referring to the epoch of the earth that has started around 12,000 years ago. And he then told the audience that we were no longer living in the Holocene, but in a new epoch, what he called as Anthropocene. Here, anthropo means human and scenes mean epoch. The Anthropocene refers to the age of humankind in which human has been the strongest force on Earth that has changed the planet significantly. Hence, the easiest way to understand the Anthropocene is in terms of its scale and system. The scale of change has been brought by human species is not only national or global right now, but it is in fact in a planetary scale. In the whole planet has been changed by human activities. This planetary change has led to the changing in the Earth system, including geological composition of the Earth, climatic patterns. You may see climate change, forest fire, for instance. Nowadays in Germany, we experience heat wave, for instance. It very rarely happens, but nowadays, because of the climate change, the heat wave is also hit European countries. And also the Earth's surface has been changed, and also the ocean. The ocean right now has been the biggest trash dumping site for humanities in Indonesia, one of the biggest countries contributing to this problem. Then the question would be, when has the Anthropocene started? William Rudiman, for instance, argues that the Anthropocene actually began 1,000 years ago as a result of the discovery of agriculture and subsequent technological innovation in the practice of farming. But some respond to Rudiman observation by saying that the impacts of agriculture would not reach a planetary scale of change in the Earth system, while other scientists observe that the birth of the Anthropocene was started in the Industrial Revolution, which has increased the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere that has led to the climate change. On the other camp, if you look at the slide, the significant increase of CO2, marine fish capture, surface temperature, tropical forest loss, the release of methane has taken place after 1950s. This is what Will Steven and others call as the Great Acceleration, as the moment in which Anthropocene has started. This observation is more convincing than other observation, and it has been accepted widely at the starting point of the Anthropocene. So basically, Anthropocene has started since the 1950s, indicated by the increase in CO2, marine fish capture, and other indicators and other statistic evidence that our consumption to the planet has been increased since 1950s. And what are the impacts of this great acceleration? The Earth system scientists observe that the Earth, where we are living, has 9 planetary boundaries. Basically, the planet has its own boundaries. If you may see in the picture, the color green indicates the entities, they are still within the safe operating space, while the color orange indicates the condition that have been beyond the safe limit. So as you may see, 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries have reached beyond the limit, meaning that we are no longer living in a safe operating space, especially in the context of biosphere integrity related to biodiversity. The rate of the loss of biodiversity has been increasing and so also alarming. WWF, for instance, in its report stated that 50% of biodiversity has been gone within a very short period of time, which is 50 years, and we consume this biodiversity. And also the novel entities is also been alarming beyond the limits of the planet. Novel entities is referring to the plastic waste. You know that the problem of plastic waste is very increased dramatically in the current decade because the plastic offer us with the simplistic things to wrap up our stuff, for instance, and then and will be there on the planet for 100 years. Right? And then that's why the concern with plastic waste is getting there even in the global community. And once again, this observation from the Earth system scientists prove that our planet is not in a good condition. In fact, our planet is in alarming condition. And human-driven activities has been increased exponentially, leading to the Anthropocene. In 2018, Will Steven and others conducted a risk analysis on the trajectories of the Earth system in the Anthropocene. This is what they came about. They suggest that the planet Earth, you may see in the slide, the planet Earth might soon reach a fork in the road, in which one path leads to hothouse Earth, that's the red one, the condition that would present large challenges to human society to survive, much less thrive. The other part is would lead to stabilized Earth, a path created by conscious human stewardship of the system. Although this stabilized Earth would be less accommodating than the Holocene, this new condition would allow enough stability and potential for adaptation that human societies and the biosphere that support us could continue to survive. And it means that we need to bring this Earth not toward the hothouse Earth, but also to bring this to the direction of stabilized Earth. And as a response, the scientists point out the need to reorient the development path we have today. Instead of putting economic growth as the overriding interest, nowadays it should put survival of the planet as the paramount agenda for humankind. Many observers, scientists, and political science lawyers see the root cause of this planetary crisis is our modern concept of dualism, which sees human being as a separate entity to nature. This is why we see ourselves at the center of the universe, or known as anthropocentrism. We assume that we are the dominion of the Earth and we use the resources provided by the planet as we please. Hence, in reorienting the path towards stabilized Earth, we need a new ecosophy or new philosophy by putting ecology at the center, known as ecocentrism. The next question is, how can legal scholars contribute in this developing this ecocentric model of law? And then to answer this, we can learn from other countries. Well, let's see how other countries have responded to the Anthropocene. The first lesson learned can be derived from Ecuador. In 2008, the country undertook a constitutional amendment in order to recognize the right to nature for the first time. It adds the concept of Pachamama, or Mother Earth, or in Indonesia we call it Ibu Pertiwi or Pertiwi, by stating that Pachamama has the right to exist, persist, and maintain and regenerate its vital cycle, structure, function, and its processes in evolution. It follows that every person and every community has the right to advocate on its behalf, meaning that if the right of Mother Earth is being violated by anyone, corporation, for instance, basically every citizen can step in to take necessary action, including to bring lawsuit before the court to challenge this violation. And interestingly, also since 2014, Ecuador has been advocating the establishment of the International Right of Nature Tribunal to bring corporations, especially Shells or Chevron and so forth, that destroy the planet to be legally accountable at the international level. The next one is Bolivia, in which in 2010, was the host of the World Social Forum. The outcome of this World Social Forum is the adoption of the right of Mother Earth. The similar word for the Mother Earth in Bolivia is Pachamama. The rights of Mother Earth has then been submitted to the UN, United Nations, to be a universal declaration of the rights of Mother Earth. In the declaration, it affirms that to guarantee human rights, it is necessary to recognize and defend the rights of Mother Earth and all beings in her, and that there is existing culture, practices, and laws that to do so. Particularly in Article 1, or paragraph 4 states that the inherent rights of Mother Earth are inalienable in that they arise from the same source as existence. These rights might include the rights to life and to exist, the right to continue their vital cycle and processes free from human disruption, the right to be free from contamination, pollution, and toxic and radioactive waste, and so forth. So basically, would be very interesting to look at and also to compare with New Zealand. The New Zealand also has interesting lessons. In 2014, it adopted the Urewera Act to recognize the Urewera National Park and Wanganui River as a legal personhood. This the first kind in the legal sphere where the rivers and national park is designated as a legal personhood. And this was advocated by two Maori scholars, James Morris and Jacinta Ruru. And the law says that Te Urewera is an ancient and enduring and fortress of nature, alive with history. Its scenery is abundant and with mystery, adventure, and remote beauty. And the objective of this law is to establish and preserve the perpetuity, a legal identity and protected status for Te Urewera, for its intrinsic worth and its distinct natural and cultural values, the integrity of those values for its national importance. And what we can learn from those three experiences in the three countries, Bolivia, Ecuador, and New Zealand. What is important to be noted is the fact that all attempts to build an ecocentric model of law is based on indigenous knowledge. This form of knowledge, basically the indigenous knowledge, we call it traditional knowledge or traditional wisdom and so forth, is very different epistemologically and methodologically from Western scientific knowledge. The turn to indigenous knowledge demonstrates that we cannot rely solely on Western knowledge to save the planet. In fact, the Western knowledge has contributed to the destruction of the planet in the first place. So we know that our problem in the planet right now is based on Western epistemology, where human is regarded as a separate entity to the nature. So that's why we then behave just like a king of nature in order to control nature and exploit nature. And then this brings us to the context of Indonesia. What about Indonesia? In the context of the Anthropocene, Indonesia provides an interesting narrative. Indonesia is geographically vulnerable from the impacts of global changes in the Earth system because Indonesia, as we know, is an archipelagic country. Ecologically, as a country regarded as a mega biodiversity country, in which it is the home of very significant amounts of species of mammals, species of reptiles, species of birds, and species of flora, and other world fresh and saltwater species. And even the coral reefs is very significant in Indonesia. However, the condition right now is that Indonesia has been suffering from losses of its biodiversity. Economically, Indonesia remains a country with a natural resource-based economy contributed by oil and gas, palm oil plantation, as well as mining activities. Consequently, environmental issues has been prominent as the result of the operation of these economic sectors, such as deforestation. You probably are very familiar with deforestation and forest fires in Palangkaraya, for instance, and around Sumatra as well. The loss of biodiversities and also environmental degradation and pollutions, conflict over natural resources between indigenous communities against the state or indigenous communities against corporation and so forth. So this makes Indonesia as a country in paradox. On the one hand, it contributes significantly to global change in the Earth system, especially from deforestation and forest degradation. On the other hand, it is a country that is very vulnerable from the impacts of such changes. When we see Kalimantan, for instance, its forest has been rapidly declining since the authoritarian regime of the New Order. The figure shows the decline of Kalimantan forest from 1943 to 2010 has been converted to logging industry, palm oil plantation, and mining concession. What we can learn from this is the fact that the state law has an important tool. State law as an important instrument to be mobilized in the destruction of the environment by the state, by the corporation, and so forth. Basically, these activities are illegal. That's why the state can be seen as an instrument, or also the state law has been used as an instrument in the destruction of the environment, in which the impacts of the destruction have been severe to our life, including the COVID-19 pandemic. And move to the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, the scientists increasingly agree that the virus is derived from bats with pangolins as the intermediate host. This means that COVID-19 has been contributed by Indonesia because Indonesia is at the heart of wildlife illegal trade, especially pangolins. From the slide, you may see the route of illegal trade of pangolin from Indonesia, especially from Java, Kalimantan, and also Sumatra, traded with China as the final market. Hence, the COVID-19 is a sign of failure of our environmental law in the country to protect the natural habitats of wild animals from destruction and from encroachment, and to prevent, and also the failure to prevent the protected animals such as pangolins from being traded illegally to the global markets, and that's the COVID-19 has been the result of this illegal trade. As a legal scholar, what can be done about it? Indeed, the Anthropocene as the current predicament invites legal scholars, especially adat and religious law scholars, to be at the forefront in the struggle to defend the planet. In the first step, we can take by advocating the enactment of the rights of indigenous peoples to provide recognition to the existence and the rights of indigenous peoples across Indonesia, because we need this recognition in place in order to protect the traditional knowledge, to recognize the traditional knowledge from the indigenous community, and also to contribute to address the current predicament of the Anthropocene and the climate change. Then, as a legal scholar, we have adequate skill, legal skill, and also legal equipment in reinterpreting traditional knowledge, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, and even religious doctrines in the light of reorienting human-environment relationship. Basically, in this regard, we use our capabilities as a legal scholar to revitalize or reinterpret traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge in order to protect the environment. By crafting this, we provide a legal weapon that can be utilized or mobilized by other communities and also environmental movements in defending their livelihood and the environment. My research in Bali, for instance, finds that religious and other legal system might potentially play an important role to counterbalance state law that justify the destruction of the environment. Basically, when the state has been captured by corporation, by the interest of economic growth, or captured by rent-seeking practices from the government official, then the community, local community, in protesting against mining, protesting against activity that have detrimental effect to the environment, they turn into adat law, they turn into religious law to back up their stance. That's why I see this, that religious and adat law might provide a potential repertoire for the local communities, adat communities, to defend their environment and to defend their livelihood. I think this will be the role that can be played by legal scholars, especially those who are concerned with adat law and religious law in relation to the environment. And this presentation is to invite legal scholars who are concerned with adat law and religious law to start looking at traditional knowledge and how to interpret this traditional knowledge in the light of reorienting our path of development in order to protect the planet. I will stop here. I will then we can continue in the discussion session. So I bring back time to Ms. Agni. Time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Agung, for such kind of fruitful insight and interesting presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, and now we come to our last speaker, but not the least, Mrs. Dr. Dewi Bunga, SHMH. Hi, Mrs. Dewi Bunga. Hello, how are you today?
Fine.
Are you ready to present your presentation?
Yes,
Okay.
ready.
Okay. Before you start your presentation, I will tell the audience about a little bit about you. So, Mrs. Dr. Dewi Bunga is a lecturer in University of Hindu Negeri I Gusti Bagus Sugriwa Denpasar, Bali. She is also a researcher and journal reviewer. She got the Master of Law in Udayana University and her doctoral from Gajah Mada University in 2021. She also received some reward from, for example, in 2009, she got most UNESCO United Nations LIPI Award 2009, the first prize in in the writing competition on implementation of human rights in Indonesia, social and human science perspective. And in 2013, she became the third best participant in general writing competition for Dharma Samudra Day. Okay, that's a bit about our last speaker, Mrs. Dr. Dewi Bunga. Please welcome, and time is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Anggi. Okay, good morning. First of all, I would like to say thank you for the opportunity given to me. I'm Bunga as the speaker on this international conference on law held by Dharma Sastra, Faculty of Institut Agama Hindu Negeri Tampung Penyang, Palangkaraya. Okay, on this occasion, I would like greet to Dr. Imade Kastama, SHMH, the Dean of Dharma Sastra, or representing Ibu Sri Kayun, SHMSA, Chairman of the committee, Ibu Lina Sakina Salim from Islamic Religious Council of Singapore, Bapak Orbli Igusti Agung Madewardana PhD from Faculty of Law, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and also Ibu Made Anggi as moderator and all seminar participants today wherever you are. Okay, berhubung saya melihat juga partisipan ini adalah teman-teman dari Indonesia, maka kemungkinan saya menggunakan dua bahasa, saya menggunakan bahasa Inggris dan juga bahasa Indonesia. Dan sehubungan juga saya tahu bahwa Ibu Lina Sakina Salim juga pernah kuliah di Indonesia dan bisa berbahasa Indonesia. Baik, yang pertama, first of all, transnational crime. Jadi kalau kita melihat fenomena cybercrime ini, kita akan melihat sebagai sebuah kejahatan transnasional. Jadi, cybercrime is a global threat. Criminal and technical infrastructure they use are often based overseas, making international collaboration essential. Jadi kalau kita lihat, cybercrime ini adalah kejahatan yang sebenarnya merupakan suatu ancaman global yang kita lihat bahwa ada pertautan berbagai negara, bisa dilakukan oleh pelaku yang berasal dari berbagai negara yang berbeda dengan metode-metode kejahatan yang sangat canggih dan international collaboration esensial. Jadi ada kerjasama yang dilakukan oleh warga negara yang berbeda, pelaku yang berbeda, bisa menyerang korban di negara yang lain. Dan itu dilakukan lintas batas negara dengan kecepatan yang real time, tanpa kita mengenal batas wilayah dan tanpa kita mengenal batas waktu. Kemudian kalau kita lihat, cybercrime is the one of the fastest growing form of transnational crime faced by Interpol's member countries, while rapid growth in internet and computer technology has enabled economic and social growth. An increasing reliance on the internet has created risk, vulnerabilities, and open up new possibilities for criminal activity. Jadi kalau kita melihat ini, bahwa kejahatan transnasional ini sesuai dengan tema yang disodorkan kepada saya oleh panitia, jadi sebenarnya cybercrime ini merupakan suatu tantangan global di mana negara-negara itu melaksanakan berbagai macam kebijakan, program, komitmen, dan regulasi agar dan berbagai regulasi supaya dilakukan berbagai cara yang dilakukan untuk menanggulangi terorisme, menanggulangi cybercrime ini. Dan kalau kita lihat dari sejarahnya, pertama kali sebenarnya cybercrime itu sudah ada konvensinya di tahun 2021, itu sekitar 19 tahun yang lalu. untuk melakukan malah 21 tahun yang lalu ya. Jadi negara-negara di Uni Eropa itu melakukan berbagai upaya, berbagai komitmen, berbagai tukar menukar teknologi dan pengetahuan untuk bagaimana cara menanggulangi cybercrime. Nah, kalau kita bicara masalah definisi, discuss about the definition, there is no international definition of cybercrime and cyber attack. Offenses typically cluster around the following categories. Yang pertama, itu first, offenses against the confidentiality, integrity, availability of computer data and system, computer-related offenses, content-related offenses, and offenses related to infringement of copyright and related rights. Kalau kita melihat di sini sebenarnya ada perbedaan antara Budapest Convention atau kalau kita lihat ada pengaturan-pengaturan internasional yang berbeda dengan di Indonesia ketika kita berbicara mengenai cybercrime. Ada persamaannya, misalnya offenses against the confidentiality, integrity, availability of computer data and system, computer-related offenses. Misalnya, jadi kita berbicara mengenai cracking, hacking, bagaimana masuk ke dalam sistem secara melawan hukum, bagaimana orang yang tidak memiliki akses terhadap komputer tersebut, tetapi dia memaksakan masuk. Nah, yang berbeda mungkin adalah dua yang terakhir. Yang pertama, content-related offenses, jadi terkait dengan misalnya pornografi. Kalau di Indonesia kita berbicara pornografi semuanya adalah kejahatan. Tetapi kalau kita bicara Budapest Convention, kita berbicara juga di negara lain, ternyata pornografi itu tidak semuanya merupakan tindak pidana. Yang merupakan criminal offenses itu adalah child pornography. Kemudian ada yang disebut dengan offenses related to infringement of copyright and related right. Jadi kalau kita bicara masalah cybercrime di sini, ternyata dunia internasional itu sudah memberikan concern yang sangat tinggi untuk masalah hak cipta dan juga hak yang terkait. Jadi kalau misalnya kalau performance ya, ada misalnya koreografi di dalam sebuah konser, itu namanya terkait. Nah, sebenarnya kalau kita berbicara masalah cybercrime itu sebenarnya adalah ada beberapa yang memang kejahatan yang menggunakan teknologi sebagai sasaran, tapi ada juga yang menggunakan teknologi sebagai media. Kita melihat di sini ada istilahnya perubahan ya dari traditional criminal technique menjadi bagaimana menggunakan teknologi, kemudian menggunakan teknologi informasi sehingga dia dikatakan sebagai cybercrime. Jadi kalau next in the features of the comparison of traditional criminal technique and cybercrime, in traditional criminal technique, there are burglary, descriptive color, extortion, fraud, identity theft, child exploitation. Nah, ini kemudian dikemas dengan teknologi yang fraud, penipuan. Sebenarnya fraud itu kan penipuan itu sudah ada dari zaman dulu. Cuma mungkin medianya adalah ketika kita berkumpul bersama, kemudian bercerita, kemudian melakukan penipuan sehingga orang itu memberikan uang kepada kita, tetapi dengan penggunaan internet fraud ya misalnya, itu adalah menggunakan media sosial. Sama juga dengan menghina orang lain, defamation. Defamation itu kan bisa dilakukan di mana orang itu menghina orang lain, menyerang kehormatan orang lain secara terbuka di seminar misalnya. Tetapi dengan teknologi informasi, kita bisa menggunakan teknologi kemudian melakukan penghinaan itu misalnya di sosial media atau dengan media Zoom misalnya. Child exploitation juga seperti itu. Jadi kalau child eksploitasi kalau zaman dulu dengan traditional criminal technique, memukul anak, mencaci maki, psikis ya, jadi kekerasan psikis, kemudian mengeksploitasi ekonomi, menyuruh bekerja, tetapi dengan internet juga bisa melakukan child exploitation, misalnya bullying terhadap anak, kemudian meminta anak untuk menjadi seleb TikTok misalnya, bekerja sepanjang waktu, kemudian akhirnya anak itu diharuskan bekerja oleh orang tuanya melalui media sosial. Itu sebenarnya adalah bentuk dari child exploitation. Nah, kalau kita lihat the most common type of cybercrime, jadi kalau the number of American who fell victim to the following type of internet crime in 2020, kalau kita lihat ini yang paling tertinggi itu adalah phishing, smishing, kemudian non-payment, non-delivery, jadi penggunaan credit card, kemudian juga menggunakan sistem pembayaran melalui akun e-money atau juga e-wallet ya. Nah, jadi kalau kemarin saya ngobrol sama teman-teman cyber di Polda, bahwa ketika aliran dana itu dialirkan di perbankan, itu lebih gampang untuk dideteksi. PPATK pun juga bisa masuk, tetapi bagaimana kalau kita menggunakan e-wallet? Mohon maaf ya, saya mungkin sebut merek ya. Misalnya ke GoPay, ke ShopeePay, kemudian ke OVO, itu justru malah lebih sulit untuk terdeteksi. Nah, kemudian yang berikutnya adalah personal data. Terkadang kita nggak sengaja memberikan personal data kita yang ternyata bisa dimanfaatkan untuk suatu kejahatan. Misalnya, kita memposting identity card, kemudian juga driving license, yang mana itu memuat data pribadi kita yang akhirnya dimanfaatkan untuk kejahatan. Ini termasuk juga identity theft ya, extortion, kemudian confidence atau romance fraud, tech support investment ya. Kemudian saya mengambil satu topik yang menurut saya sangat menarik dan related dengan tema ini. Jadi saya mengambil topik cyber terrorism. Kalau kita lihat di dalam tema bagaimana kita menghadapi revolusi industri 5.0, kalau 4.0 itu adalah berbicara masalah using technology. Kalau 5 menggunakan using teknologi yang lebih kompleks, termasuk juga memanfaatkan artificial intelligence, atau misalnya kita menggunakan robot untuk melakukan sebuah kejahatan. Nah, termasuk juga sebenarnya kalau kita berbicara dengan mengenai cyber terrorism ini. Nah, kalau kita lihat, jadi sama seperti cybercrime, there is no definition, no unification definition, jadi nggak ada kesatuan definisi tentang cyber terrorism. But cyber terrorism involves the use of computer or related technology with the intention of causing harm or damage in order to coerce a civilian population, influence policy of target government, or otherwise affect its conduct. Jadi kalau kita bicara masalah cyber terrorism, sebenarnya adalah tindakan terorisme yang kemudian memanfaatkan teknologi informasi. Jadi involves the use the computers and related technology. Jadi pakai komputer atau mungkin pakai gadget, handphone, kemudian pakai misalnya apakah bentuknya PC dan sebagainya, yang menyebabkan suatu ketakutan bahwa kalau kita pahami terorisme itu tujuannya bukan untuk membunuh, tetapi sebenarnya tujuannya adalah bagaimana membuat ketakutan sebanyak mungkin, mempengaruhi kebijakan pemerintah untuk sama dengan ideologinya. Furthermore, cyber terrorism which should be differentiated from hacktivism and cyber warfare implies targeting critical infrastructure. Jadi kalau kita lihat pengalaman-pengalaman Indonesia, beberapa target serangan misalnya kantor polisi, kemudian tempat pariwisata, jadi public area, kemudian juga termasuk juga rumah ibadah, gereja, itu merupakan suatu target dari gerakan terorisme. Nah, bagaimana dengan cyber terrorism tersebut? Kalau kita lihat, ini ada beberapa, the use of the internet for terrorist purpose, such as Yang pertama, attack via internet that cause damage not only the essential electronic communication system and the IT infrastructure, but also to other infrastructure system, legal interest, including human life, to public utility damage. Jadi bagaimana kita menggunakan teknologi informasi, kemudian infrastruktur teknologi itu untuk menyebabkan suatu suatu serangan terhadap kehidupan manusia, termasuk juga terhadap public area. Kemudian dissemination of illegal content. Jadi mendiseminasikan menyebarluaskan konten-konten yang ilegal, misalnya yang terkait dengan radikalisme, including threatening with the terrorist attack. Jadi kalau menceritakan tentang serangan-serangan teroris yang telah dilakukan, kemudian iklan, termasuk glorifying terrorism, memuliakan terorisme. Inilah yang mungkin kurang di dalam aturan di Indonesia, bahwa kalau di beberapa negara terorisme itu termasuk memuliakan teroris. Misalnya, ketika teroris menjalani eksekusi mata yang memuliakan, memuja, mengatakan itu sebagai sebuah perjuangan, itu dipandang sebagai sebuah gerakan terorisme. Kemudian other logistical uses of the IT system by terrorists such as internal communication, information, acquisition and target analysis, termasuk juga aliran dana terhadap teroris itu dikatakan sebagai cyber terrorism juga. Nah, dilanjut bahwa cyber terrorists are state sponsor and non-state actor who use cyber attack to achieve their objective. Jadi kalau kita berbicara masalah terorisme, kita akan berbicara masalah dua pelaku. Apakah dia pelaku negara, teroris sponsored by the state, atau dia bukan sponsor negara. Misalnya adalah jaringan-jaringan yang tidak ada terkait dengan negara tertentu yang memberikan fasilitas, baik itu dana, keuangan, persenjataan. Nah, ini yang kita teroris secara umumnya. Nah, dilanjut, kemudian apa sih teroris use of the internet? Jadi for incitement, recruitment, radicalization, financing, information sharing, intelligence, communication, cyber terrorism, propaganda, and psychological operation ya. Jadi itu adalah penggunaan internet bagi teroris. Kemudian kalau dilihat di sini misalnya membuat Facebook ya untuk mencari orang-orang yang mendukung gerakannya. Kemudian kalau kita berbicara cyber terrorism, berbicara mengenai impact. Jadi kalau bicara akibat dari teroris itu bukan hanya akibat yang sifatnya material, seperti kerusakan bangunan, kemudian kerusakan infrastruktur, tetapi juga non-material atau immaterial impact. Misalnya rasa takut, traumatik, cacat tubuh, kemudian ketidakpercayaan, termasuk juga sebenarnya lumpuhnya ekonomi. Seperti dulu serangan bom Bali 1 dan 2 itu mampu sekali untuk melumpuhkan ekonomi melalui sektor pariwisata. Kemudian berbicara mengenai method of action. Jadi ini adalah metode-metode yang secara melawan hukum menggunakan bom persenjataan tanpa legitimasi bahwa mereka memiliki hak untuk memiliki senjata. Kemudian domainnya adalah terjadi di cyberspace. Kemudian tool of attack, berbicara masalah motivasi, berbicara masalah political, ideological, and social, termasuk juga terhadap target, jadi critical national information, infrastruktur computer system, critical infrastructure civilian population. Kemudian dilanjutkan impact of terrorism, seperti yang tadi sudah disampaikan, bahwa the impact of terrorism can be broke down into many different categories, including the impact of the individual, the impact on society, the impact on government, economy, international community. In some cases, the example we study will overlap into different categories. Jadi kalau kita lihat ya, impact-nya ini sangat meluas karena tujuan dari terorisme itu adalah bagaimana cara membuat ketakutan dan kerusakan yang semakin banyak mungkin, yang semakin meluas mungkin. Itulah yang menjadi target ukuran bahwa serangan teroris itu berhasil atau tidak. Semakin banyak yang memiliki rasa takut, semakin banyak kerusakan yang terjadi, maka semakin sukseslah tindakan teroris tersebut. Dan itu dipermudah dengan menggunakan teknologi informasi. Nah, kalau kita lihat the impact of terrorism, Indonesia berada di level medium. Kalau kita lihat yang high itu adalah di Afrika ya. Kemudian nah, kalau kita berbicara masalah cyberterrorism atau memanfaatkan teknologi informasi untuk kepentingan teroris, jadi dalam hal merekrut, kemudian melakukan propaganda, kemudian melakukan radikalisasi, termasuk mungkin juga dalam tantangan 5.0 adalah menggunakan bot misalnya untuk meledakkan area publik. Nah, ini kan menjadi suatu tantangan tersendiri bagi kita untuk bagaimana caranya bagaimana caranya menanggulangi cyberterorisme. Bahkan bukan melakukan penegakan hukum utamanya, tapi bagaimana preventif atau tindakan-tindakan prevention program, salah satunya adalah dengan sifatnya memberikan pemahaman-pemahaman termasuk juga deradicalization untuk residif atau orang-orang yang sudah pernah melakukan terorisme. Jadi di sini kita berbicara masalah deradicalization refers to the process of divorcing a person. Jadi kalau kita lihat deradicalization is a program that can be done to tackle terrorism. Jadi bagaimana deradikalisasi itu adalah melepaskan orang-orang yang sudah terpapar radikalisme, maka tadi sebenarnya sangat tersambung dengan apa yang disampaikan Ibu Lina tadi. Multikulturalism itu sangat baik, toleransi itu sangat baik untuk mencegah terjadinya terorisme. Jadi salah satunya adalah program deradikalisasi. Jadi bagaimana cara meningkatkan toleransi, bagaimana memisahkan terlebih dahulu mereka dari lingkungannya untuk kembali lagi mengkaji mungkin pemahaman-pemahaman yang selama ini ternyata kurang tepat. Kemudian yang terakhir, saya ingin menyampaikan bahwa mengutip dari apa yang disampaikan oleh Barack Obama, no religion is responsible for terrorism. Kalau kita berbicara masalah agama itu tidak bertanggung jawab. Tidak ada negara yang memberikan legitimasi, negara yang memberikan kewajiban, karena semua agama itu mengajarkan kebaikan. People are responsible for violence and terrorism. Jadi kalau terjadi terorisme, maka yang bertanggung jawab itu adalah orangnya, bukan agamanya. Dan kemarin saya juga berdiskusi, kebetulan ada mahasiswa yang juga menulis tentang terorisme, dikatakan bahwa senjata itu bisa membunuh teroris, tetapi pendidikan, education, itu bisa membunuh terorisme. Itu merupakan satu makna yang mendalam. Kalau kita menggunakan senjata, kita hanya bisa membunuh teroris satu persatu, tetapi dengan pendidikan yang baik, kita bisa membunuh paham. Kita bisa menanggulangi terorisme itu secara keseluruhan. Jadi, whoever kills an innocent life, it is as he has killed all a humanity. Jadi membunuh orang yang tidak bersalah itu sebenarnya adalah membunuh rasa kemanusiaan. Baik, demikian yang bisa saya sampaikan pada seminar hari ini. And then I return to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Bunga. That's for giving us such informative and interesting presentation. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the question and answer section. I would like to have 3 questions first from the participants. So please, for the participant who want to ask the question directly, you can press the raise hand button or type your question in chat box. Once again, now we come to the question and answer section. I would like to receive 3 questions first from the participant. So please, for the participant who wants to ask the question directly to the speakers, you can press the raise hand button.
Excuse me, moderator.
Okay. Yes, please introduce yourself first.
Okay, thank you. My name is Evi Faridawati. I'm from Palangkaraya University, and I have question for 3 of the speakers for today. Directly, I can ask directly.
Yes, of course. You
Okay.
can ask directly to the speakers.
Maybe for the first time, I will ask to Mrs. Lina about the protection for the community in the Singapore. The first question is about, because I heard about in the presentation, seems that community in Singapore is really protected by the government, and seems every people will come to the community center. About my question is, how about if we want to celebrate something in our religion occasion, example, the special occasion for our religion, example is Easter or Christmas. Did the government allow us to celebrate in, I mean, not inside of our church or our mosques? They will allow us to celebrate in the street, something like that, or not? That's the question number 1. And question number 2 is about, should be if we live in Singapore, about if we wanna apply the job, should be we report to the community center or before we apply the job, or and report the every activity to the community center? That's 2 questions for Mrs. Lina. And then for Mr. Agung Wardana, I want to ask about the regulation and law for the manage the Anthropocene as the current predicament activities, because if we want to how I can say, if we want to manage this Anthropocene to be the good, we can regulate this with the good support by the good regulation. How about the regulation to support this? That's the question. Okay. And for Miss Dewi Bunga, maybe I will ask in Indonesia language. Buat Ibu Dewi Bunga, mungkin pertanyaan saya begini, Bu, mengenai cybercrime, cyber terrorism, apakah itu juga berlaku pada serangan terhadap personal? Karena apa, pernah terjadi pada salah satu teman dan itu mengakibatkan satu kematian karena diteror dengan menggunakan blackmail. Mungkin karena ada satu teman ini melakukan diteror dengan istilahnya dengan hubungan atau relationship gitu ya, jarak jauh, kemudian diteror sehingga karena sudah dekat, sehingga teman saya ini melakukan mungkin melakukan video yang arahnya ke pornografi, sehingga hal itu dijadikan sebagai alat untuk memeras dan menteror. Dan teman ini karena ketakutan sehingga mengakibatkan dia sampai jatuh ke dalam obat-obatan dan sebagainya, dan ketakutan karena itu disebarkan. Akhirnya karena stres dan sebagainya, teman saya ini akhirnya meninggal. Nah, apakah itu juga termasuk dalam cyber terorisme, dan bagaimana dengan regulasinya juga? Karena kalau tidak ada regulasi yang kuat juga dan tidak didukung oleh aparat hukum yang mendukung tentang sanksi dari akibat cyber terorisme ini, sangat mustahil untuk bisa melindungi korban, karena sudah pernah terjadi juga polisi ataupun aparat hukum itu mereka sulit membuktikan apa yang namanya cyber terorisme ini, walaupun sudah terbukti dalam media sosial juga kasusnya itu sangat sulit untuk diangkat, dan mereka lebih memilih ke arah perdamaian daripada memberikan sanksi kepada orang yang berbuat. Demikian pertanyaan saya. Terima kasih. Demikian moderator.
Oke, terima kasih Ibu Evi untuk pertanyaan-pertanyaannya. Mungkin kita beri waktu dulu sebentar, atau any speakers want to answer directly? How about Miss? Okay, Miss Lina, the time is yours.
Okay, hi, selamat sejahtera, Madam Evi. So for the question about the usage of CC or the community centers in Singapore, so because it is considered as a secular space, therefore upacara keagamaan is not allowed. The space can only be used for secular activities that has no relation to politics, that has no relation to religion. So I like your question because it questions us about the representation of the religious community in the public space. Yeah. So for example, to have like a procession on the street, it requires permit. So you have to ask for permit. And even if you register for permit, it does not necessarily mean that you will absolutely get it. It depends on how you would want the procession to be, and whether it will disrupt any public order or public occasion, or whether there will be noise pollution and so on, because there are cases where some religious procession is not permitted in Singapore, despite like for example a religious procession by the Hindu community actually. So we have the Taipusam. So the Taipusam is a local practice by the Hindu community, and in the past they have always been having the procession on the street, but after the state has got its independence, they have decided to actually not allow it to be a public procession, and it can only be done within the temple areas. Yeah, because one of the key reason is due to the noise pollution that such festivities would contribute. So that is one of the examples that I can provide. With regards to the application of jobs, that will not be handled by the CC. So the CC will only handle activities that are co-creational, that are recreational in the sense, leisure activities, or to say in a better word, activities that requires declaration of work and so on is not handled by the CC. It's handled by the Ministry of Manpower itself. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Miss Lina Sakina. And what the other speakers who wants to answer? Okay, Mr. Agung, name is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Ibu Evi. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes,
Can you
yes,
hear me?
yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question with regard to regulation to manage Anthropocene to be a good Anthropocene. It's a really good question, really. But unfortunately, right now, the regulation we have is not really in a way to address Anthropocenes, but we still pursue our agenda to putting economic growth as the main national interest. That's why by pursuing economic growth, we know that many natural resources will be more extracted and more exploited, and then the environment will becoming more severe. And in this regards, regulations related to the environment, it's also remained based on a Holocene point of view, which means that there's still the assumption that the environment is stable, the climate is stable, and every environmental impact assessment, for instance, predict that the using a business as usual model, basically, and how the environment is still stable, and then if we exploit we chop down the forest, for instance, the impact will be known because we assume that the stable impacts from on our activities. But nowadays, in the context of Anthropocene, that's no longer the case. Chopping down the forest is not only causing, for instance, floods, but also might cause the climate change even worse, for instance, and also might impact other things, for instance, biodiversity and so forth. And that's why Earth system scientists call our predicament nowadays as the terra incognita. We don't know what is happening on our Earth. Well, for instance, the astronomers a couple of days ago stating that based on their findings, the Earth is moving faster and shorter. And it means that the day we experience right now is no longer that used to be. We experience the day even shorter and faster. And that's this kind of impacts from that question as well. So we never know because we are in terra incognita. But unfortunately, our regulation is not a way to address it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Agung, for the question. And then the last, Mrs. Dewi Bunga. Time is yours.
Terima kasih, Mbak Anggi. Jadi terima kasih atas pertanyaannya kepada Ibu Evi Farida. Apakah cyberterrorism juga berlaku secara personal? Jadi begini, teror itu harus dibedakan teror dengan terorisme. Orang menteror orang lain ketika itu ditujukan kepada personal, itu kita sebut dengan pengancaman, dan mungkin juga pemerasan, yang mana itu diatur di dalam Undang-Undang ITE, Undang-Undang Informasi dan Transaksi Elektronik, sehingga itu merupakan suatu tindak pidana. Berbeda dengan cyberterrorism, jadi kalau cyberterrorism itu korbannya tidak ada target sasaran personal, tetapi semakin banyak orang. Nah, posisinya tadi dalam kasus tersebut, saya melihat banyak sekali untuk kasus ini, dan kami pun, saya dengan teman-teman cyber Polda juga itu biasa berbicara masalah ini. Modusnya sama. Jadi mereka membangun hubungan grooming misalnya ya, jadi membangun hubungan emosional dengan orang lain yang berbeda kota, kemudian dengan relasi personal, dengan pacaran, kemudian akhirnya membuat konten-konten yang mengandung muatan pornografi misalnya. Kemudian itu saling bertukar dan akhirnya malah digunakan untuk melakukan pemerasan, dan tujuannya adalah uang, jadi mendapatkan uang yang sebanyak-banyaknya, dengan teror bahwa kalau tidak mau memberikan nanti datanya akan disebar, karena itu sudah di-profiling. Nah, ternyata untuk dicek IP address-nya, pelaku ini sebenarnya adalah bukan individu, mereka jaringan kriminal yang pernah terjadi dulu di Bali. Ternyata pelakunya itu berada di Sulawesi. Jadi adanya di Makassar. Jadi memang mereka jaringan kriminal yang bekerja sama untuk mencari orang-orang, kemudian following orang untuk diajak untuk membangun relasi secara personal, kemudian mendapatkan hal-hal yang diinginkan sampai menggunakan itu untuk alat-alat pemerasan. Jadi sebenarnya ini merupakan suatu tindak pidana. Nah, kalau polisi sebenarnya tidak bisa kita katakan sulit, karena cyber itu bekerja dengan sangat optimal. Hanya saja kasus yang dilaporkan itu jumlahnya sangat banyak. Ukuran Polda Bali saja sampai, kalau tidak salah dikatakan sampai bulan Agustus ini itu sudah 1.300 sampai 1.400 kasus yang masuk, dan itu semuanya kasus cyber dibandingkan dengan kejahatan-kejahatan yang lain. Nah, kalau khusus untuk di tataran internasional, data yang bisa dibuka dan diberikan oleh sosial media atau jejaring sosial, misalnya Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, itu memang terbatas. Yang pertama adalah satu yang terkait dengan terorisme, itu pasti diberikan alat buktinya. Pasti bisa dibuka digital evidence-nya. Yang kedua adalah terkait dengan anak. Yang terakhir adalah terkait dengan peredaran gelap narkotika. Jadi hanya kejahatan-kejahatan itu saja di mana Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram itu mau memberikan data untuk digital evidence-nya, alat buktinya. Di luar dari itu, hoax misalnya, kemudian defamation, pencemaran nama baik, itu tidak bisa diberikan datanya. Demikian, karena kan memang kembali lagi pengaturan di negara-negara itu berbeda. Jadi kalau di luar negeri, hoax itu tidak dianggap sebagai sebuah kejahatan, itu adalah cara kita mencerna informasi mau dibohongi atau tidak. Kalau kita mau dibohongi, kita meneruskan, itulah hoax. Disitulah dituntut pintar, digital literasi itu sangat dipentingkan. Demikian yang bisa saya sampaikan. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Ibu Bunga atas jawabannya. Bagaimana Ibu Evi? Apakah ada yang ingin ditanyakan lagi?
Mungkin cukup itu saja dulu. Terima kasih, jelas, sudah cukup jelas.
Terima kasih Bu Evi atas pertanyaannya. Baik, sepertinya kita juga mempunyai beberapa pertanyaan. Well, we have already 3 questions in the chat box for the speakers. For Mr. Agung, what do you think are the main obstacles in preventing the destruction of the earth, such as deforestation and carbon emission, especially in Indonesia as developing country? That's the first question for Mr. Agung. And that's question from Mr. Alfred Yetno. The second question is come from Ibu Nyoman Tantri. This is for old speaker. No. Oh yeah, for the old speaker, how does the Singapore government prevent the politician not to use religion issues in campaigns? In Indonesia, this is the big problem in Indonesia democracy. Thank you. And the last is from Mr. Komang Dharma. This is for all speaker. What do you think and what do you see the differences between Singapore and Indonesia in terms of multiculturalism? The challenges, as we know that Indonesia had been colonized by Netherlands 400 of years ago, and the large population of Indonesia. Okay, time is yours.
Shall I start?
So of course,
Okay.
Please, Mr. Agung.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mas Alfred Yetno. That's a very good question. I agree with scientists and also observers saying that the biggest problems of our environmental politics right now is with regard to economic growth, because we assume that we can pursue economic growth within a very limited planet. So that's kind of wishful thinking. Basically, there is no economic growth within a very limited planet. That's why we need to be aware that what we can pursue in our planet should be within the boundaries of the planet. And the main obstacle in tackling this destruction of the earth, especially deforestation and carbon emission in Indonesia, it's still the paradigm exercised by the government and the state, where the economic growth remains the overriding interest of the nation. They put economic growth as the main priority, meaning that the environment would be the second and the third, and so forth. The environment is not really the priority from the governments, because the governments keep pushing economic development at the expense of environmental protection and also social development. I think this is the biggest challenges for us, because in order to tackle the environmental problem, we need to slow the growth and even to degrowth. What many scientists would say, we need to stop our deforestation. We need to stop chop down our forests by focusing on other source of economic income, for instance, creative economy and other human developments, focus, creativity and so forth would be very potential to be developed in Indonesia, because we a huge country with millions of population. That's, I think, the answer for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Agung, for the answer. I hope Mr. Alfred can understand about that. And then, how about Mrs. Lina? Okay, Mrs. Lina want to answer the question from Ibu Tantri. Time is yours.
Okay, so thank you so much, Ibu Tantri, for the question. So your question is regarding politicians to use religious issues, right? During my presentation, I talk about religious leaders using politics to gain support. So this is the other way around. So with regards to that, first and foremost, one thing to note for politicians, they cannot represent any religion. So although they may belong to a religious community, but when they use the head as a politician, right, they cannot bring religious issues. Even if, like, for example, if you are a Christian and you have things about the Christian community that you want to bring to the parliament, you cannot actually do it by your own self. You need to actually do it through the religious community themselves. So if you feel that there are some dissatisfaction about how the government treat your community, then you have to go through the community itself, meaning to say the religious leader would have to communicate with the state. For example, particularly for Singapore, for the Muslim, we have a Minister of Muslim Affairs. So of all the other 10 religion or more, only Islam has the Muslim Affairs Minister. This is also because of the colonial I would say the effect from colonialism is that when the colonial power came to our area in Malaya, right, religious practices, religious law has been cut short, or rather has been decreased to only matters about the private affairs, particularly on marriage, divorce, and inheritance. And so this is handled by the Muslim community themselves. And so when they decided to create the Religious Council of Singapore, they need to have a minister that administers this religious council, and therefore we have the Minister of the Muslim Affairs. And so that is how, for example, for the Muslim communities, if you have any dissatisfaction, you go through that minister. But for other religious community, for politicians, if you have anything, you need to go through the religious community themselves. So in that sense, you do not allow rhetorics on religion and politics to be mixed together. Another way is also Sedition Act and the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act also is applicable to politicians. Although I mentioned in the beginning when they created that law, it was targeting the religious leaders. In today's time, it's not just religious leaders who actually can make the community do something or act upon something. So that is also applicable for the politicians lah. So if you say that what prevent I think the strict law actually prevent, and because it has been indoctrinated since the beginning, so you grow up, particularly you grow up with the idea. So to the point that religion is a very sensitive issue. And even if you ask the layperson, the people in public, to talk about religion, it's actually quite difficult for people to talk very deeply about religion. So what more for politicians? Yeah. With regards to the second question, I think the second question about the difference in terms of multiculturalism and the challenges, I think in a first glance, right, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia looks similar because we have the similar group of people. They might be much more diverse internally in the subgroups, but generally we have the Indians, Chinese, and the people native to Southeast Asia within these countries. But the understanding of multiculturalism and the representation of each racial and religious group can differ from countries to countries depending on the different colonial administration. So I don't think I'm at the best position to talk about how the Dutch administration was, but in terms of Singapore and to compare with, for example, Malaysia, for Singapore, because they push the idea of multiculturalism to indicate that everyone has equal right to stay in this country. No one can say because you are a migrant, therefore go back to your country, because it is an understood idea that everyone is a migrant except for the orang asli, except for the orang laut and so on. But the rest of us are migrants, and our ancestors are migrant. We are descendants of migrants. Therefore, no one has the right to claim ownership of the land. And so in that sense, we started off equal in that sense. Whereas, for example, if you want to compare to Malaysia, there is this concept of Bumi Putra, means that it is given to the native people, the orang asli, and also the Malay community as Bumi Putra, and therefore the rhetorics of Malaysia being a Malay land only for Malays, to prioritize Malay, is something that is very different to how it was in Singapore. But if you think about it, people from Singapore are also part of Malaya. We have families and friends who are in Malaysia, and therefore the sentiments that people may have about I being a Malay in this area, this is my land, this is my country, people are coming here, it can also be expressed by the people also within the community. And so one of the ways for the government to actually address this in the beginning after the independence was that they gave a lot of privileges and support for the Malay Muslim community, so that they feel that they are not being left behind. So this was in the beginning where a lot of things were given for free, given privilege for the Malay community, because when we reached independence, the Malay community was at the lowest strata of the society. There are very low rates of employment, very low rates of education in comparison to the Chinese and the Indians. And so these are some of the policies that the government adopted to push the community upwards. And I think this is one of the ways. There's a lot of things to unpack if you want to talk about this, but one key note is that the government addresses that inequality can exist and have existed, and they try to change it when they inherited this new community as citizens of Singapore. And as the time progresses, they continue to see whether it is still relevant or not to continue giving privileges to the Malays apart from others. So that's why they actually cancelled that privilege and they created these self-help groups instead. So in a way, everyone then gets assistance regardless of the racial groups you belong to. Yeah, I think that is all that I can say for now. Thank you very much for the question.
Okay, thank you so much, Miss Alina, for answering the questions. I think we have such interesting discussion, because from the chat box we got the message from Mr. Paskatu Hardinata, who want to ask to Mrs. Dewi Bunga. Okay, time is yours.
Yes, thank you. I'm Paskatu Hardinata from Palangkaraya. I am Judge of High Courts Palangkaraya High Courts to Dewi Bunga ya. Karena ini Dewi Bunga saya pakai bahasa Indonesia saja. Baik, untuk narasumber Ibu Dewi Bunga, tadi sangat menarik sekali ya mengenai cyber terorisme ini. Di mana tadi dikatakan ada 5 impacts pengaruh ya. Yang pertama impacts of individual, society, impact of government, impacts of economy, and impact of the international community. Nah, saya sangat menarik tadi apa yang ditanyakan oleh penanya pertama tadi mengenai regulasi. Nah, tadi oleh narasumber disebutkan beberapa banyak terjadi kasus di Bali ya. Kebetulan saya sendiri adalah judge yang khusus untuk penanganan teroris ya. Karena kami pun mendapat kayak pelatihan seperti itu. Nah, kemudian yang saya tanyakan tadi saya itu kurang jelas mengenai yang membedakan ya tindak pidana biasa dengan tindak pidana teroris. Seperti itu ya. Nah, ini adalah hal yang menarik mengenai cyber ini, terutama di dalam pengaruh ekonomi. Nah, tadi disebutkan juga pengaruh kepada individual, seperti itu ya. Kalau yang kami tangani sebenarnya adalah pengaruh kepada secara global ya, artinya government, seperti itu. Nah, yang ingin saya tanyakan, apakah ada penelitian ya, perkara-perkara cyber terorisme terhadap individual ya, terhadap ekonomi yang baru. Saya pun belum, karena saya beberapa ini belum meneliti. Kemudian tadi ditanyakan oleh penanya pertama itu regulasinya. Nah, belum dijawab oleh Ibu Dewi Bunga. Demikian yang saya tanyakan. Terima kasih.
Baik, Bapak Paskatu. Iya. Bagaimana Ibu Dewi Bunga?
Ya, baik, saya langsung
silakan.
Baik, terima kasih kepada Bapak Paskatu Hardinata yang sudah memberikan pertanyaan. Jadi kalau kita berbicara masalah impact atau dampak dari terorisme itu, sebagaimana tadi yang sudah sempat kita bahas bersama, jadi dampaknya itu bukan hanya masalah ekonomi saja, tetapi juga masalah sosial, masalah individu yang terserang, kemungkinan cacat fisik, kemudian mengalami gangguan psikis, gangguan traumatik, kemudian berdampak kepada masyarakat, lumpuhnya ekonomi, dan ternyata ini bukan hanya berdampak pada ekonomi yang terdampak langsung saja sebagai korban terorisme, misalnya penyerangan waktu bom Bali ya. Jadi bukan hanya berdampak bagi orang-orang yang kafenya bekerja di kafe yang dibom saja, tetapi juga berdampak secara meluas. Jadi pariwisata itu sampai lumpuh, kemudian kenapa dikatakan juga the impact on the international community, juga masyarakat-masyarakat di luar itu tidak berani datang ke Bali karena takut dengan ancaman terorisme. Nah, kemudian tadi terkait dengan perbedaan tindak pidana biasa maupun dengan tindak pidana terorisme. Nah, ini bisa dilihat dari indikator dari tindak pidana terorisme, bahwa kalau tindak pidana terorisme itu target sasarannya itu meluas dan tujuan dari kejahatannya itu adalah membuat ketakutan. Nah, ini kalau kita flashback di sejarah pengaturan terorisme melalui Perpu ya, peraturan pemerintah pengganti undang-undang di tahun 2002 pada saat bom Bali 1, kita pada saat itu tidak memiliki undang-undang tentang terorisme. Tetapi pada saat terjadinya tindak pidana terorisme, itu sempat terjadi perdebatan hukum. Apakah ini dimasukkan ke dalam pembunuhan berencana? Atau dimasukkan ke dalam penganiayaan? Atau menggunakan nanti kumulasi? Jadi ada pembunuhan, ada penganiayaan, ada pengancaman, dan sebagainya. Tapi akhirnya diputuskan untuk membuat Perpu pada saat itu yang digunakan untuk mengadili. Kenapa? Kalau kita menggunakan tindak pidana pembunuhan berencana, Pembunuhan berencana itu kan kalau di memori van Tolechting itu tujuannya adalah menghilangkan nyawa. Penganiayaan kan tujuannya adalah menyebabkan rasa sakit. Tapi kalau terorisme adalah menyebabkan ketakutan, ancaman baik berupa kekerasan ataupun ancaman kekerasan yang tujuannya adalah ketakutan. Nah, demikian yang membedakan. Kemudian yang terakhir, apakah ada penelitian terkait dengan terorisme? Tentu banyak sekali penelitian-penelitian yang kita bisa akses melalui Google Scholar misalnya ya. Di situ banyak sekali penelitian-penelitian yang bisa kita lihat, termasuk juga penelitian-penelitian dari badan resmi pemerintah. Nah, terkait dengan regulasinya tadi, kalau terkait dengan yang pertanyaan pertama itu kan adalah tentang teror atau pengancaman terhadap personal. Jadi kita bisa melihat di Undang-Undang 11 2008 tentang informasi dan transaksi elektronik dan juga Undang-Undang Nomor 19 Tahun 2016 tentang perubahannya. Di mana kalau kita inventarisasi lagi Undang-Undang ITE atau Informasi Teknologi di Indonesia, itu ada beberapa kategori tindak pidana. Misalnya satu tentang delik kesusilaan yang dilakukan lewat internet, kemudian tentang penghinaan dan pencemaran nama baik, tentang perjudian online, tentang pemerasan dan pengancaman, tentang penyebaran kebohongan yang merugikan konsumen, kemudian tentang tentang SARA, tentang penyebarluasan konten-konten ilegal yang terkait dengan SARA, kemudian penyerangan terhadap sistem komputer, hacking yang tadi ya, cracking dan sebagainya, mengambil data secara melawan hukum. Jadi kurang lebihnya di dalam regulasi di Indonesia itu hal-hal yang diatur sebagai suatu tindak pidana. Terima kasih Bapak Paskatu Hardinata dan saya kembalikan kepada moderator.
Terima kasih Ibu untuk tanggapannya. Oke. Bagaimana Bapak Pak?
Ya, terima
Bapak
kasih.
Paskatu?
Terima kasih ke Bu Dewi. Ya, cukup. Terima kasih.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, I seem that we have an interesting discussion. We can now we open for the question. Another question.
Moderator, izin bertanya.
Oke, Miss Bapak Kiki silahkan.
Oke, terima kasih. Selamat siang Bapak Ibu.
Selamat siang.
Saya ingin bertanya ke Miss Bunga ya. Halo, suara saya terdengar?
Jelas, jelas. Silakan Bapak.
Oke, buat Miss Bunga, perkenalkan, nama saya Kiki Kristanto, dosen juga dari Fakultas Hukum Universitas Palangkaraya. Ada beberapa hal yang menarik tadi di jawaban terakhir menanggapi pertanyaan dari Pak Paskatu terkait dengan delik yang diatur dalam rumusan norma Undang-Undang ITE. Ya, yang pertama terkait dengan jenis delik atau klasifikasi delik dalam Undang-Undang ITE itu masuk kategori delik formil ataukah delik material terhadap semua delik yang diatur dalam Undang-Undang ITE, karena ada dua delik yang menurut saya itu mengarah kepada delik material ya, yang menitik beratkan kepada akibat. Ya, tetapi itu masih dalam perdebatan sehingga ada pendapat-pendapat yang berbeda terkait dengan misalnya delik yang menyebabkan kerugian konsumen dan delik yang terkait dengan SARA. Nah, misalnya terkait dengan SARA, apakah itu masuk kategori delik material yang harus menimbulkan akibat atau cukup hanya perbuatannya saja yang sudah bisa dipertanggungjawabkan pidana bagi pelakunya. Demikian yang bisa saya sampaikan. Pertanyaan ditujukan untuk Miss Bunga. Terima kasih. Selamat siang.
Selamat siang Bapak Kiki. Terima kasih atas pertanyaannya. Bagaimana Ibu Dewi Bunga mau directly?
Yes, terima kasih Pak Kiki dan Mbak Anggi yang sudah menyampaikan. Jadi saya sependapat bahwa di dalam klasifikasi delik di dalam Undang-Undang ITE ini tentu saja memang perdebatannya panjang terhadap delik formil dan material. Kalau kita bicara masalah delik formil, itu menekankan kepada rumusan perbuatan yang dilakukan, sedangkan kalau material kita akan berbicara masalah apakah telah terjadi akibatnya, karena kalau tidak terjadi akibatnya, maka itu bukan dikatakan suatu tindak pidana. Perdebatan ini saya sependapat bahwa terjadi di dalam berbagai ranah akademik dan juga dalam praktek hukum. Saya ingat pada saat itu dalam kasus yang kemarin jering ya, itu juga membicarakan apakah delik sara tadi itu masuk ke dalam delik formil maupun delik material. Memang tidak ada kesatuan pendapat tentang itu, sehingga saya mengutip apa yang disampaikan oleh Prof. Edi Hirich di dalam buku beliau, Prinsip-Prinsip Hukum Pidana, bahwa memang batasan antara delik material dengan delik formil ini adalah sangat tipis. Namun demikian, biasanya untuk yang sulit ini untuk ini kan terkait dengan pembuktiannya pembuktiannya pada saat persidangan, maka pada saat itu yang digunakan adalah pendapat ahli pada saat itu menyatakan bahwa delik sara tersebut adalah delik formil, sehingga akan memudahkan penegakan hukum untuk merumuskan akibat faktual yang terjadi dari perbuatan tersebut. Demikian ya, terima kasih atas pertanyaannya Pak Kiki.
Baik, terima kasih Miss. Saya juga sebenarnya sependapat ya, kalau terkait dengan sara itu juga masuk atau diklasifikasikan sebagai delik formil, ya bukan sebagai delik material. Karena delik formil itu lebih memudahkan aparat penegak hukum untuk melakukan penegakan hukum, karena tidak perlu dibuktikan akibat. Ya perbuatannya saja sudah bisa sudah dilakukan, sudah bisa dipertanggungjawabkan secara pidana bagi pelakunya. Dan sedikit informasi juga kalau untuk Kota Palangkaraya ini terkait dengan Undang-Undang ITE atau delik-delik ITE yang paling banyak itu 70% terkait dengan asusila, konten asusila. Yang kedua itu kerugian konsumen akibat penipuan secara online, baru yang ketiga menduduki kasus tertinggi yang pernah saya berikan ya terkait dengan keterangan ahlinya terkait dengan sara atau pencemaran nama baik juga. Itu saja yang bisa saya sampaikan. Terima kasih. Selamat siang.
Terima kasih Bapak Kiki atas pertanyaan dan tanggapannya. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. If you have any question, we still open the question and answer section. You can ask the speaker directly or type the question in the chat box. When we waiting for the next question, honestly, I have a question for Bapak Agung. This is personal question actually. I just curious about the topic that have been presented by Bapak Agung. Maybe I use Indonesia Bapak ya. Karena ini sebenarnya menarik. Cuman takutnya tidak tersampaikan kepada audience because we know yang banyaknya itu orang Indonesia begitu Pak ya. Di sini sangat menarik untuk presentasi dari Bapak Agung tentang navigasi peran pengetahuan tradisional untuk saat ini ya Pak ya. Yang ingin saya tanyakan itu bagaimana Bapak peran sarjana hukum di Indonesia ini untuk mengatasi krisis planet pada transformasi global pada saat ini. Ya, terima kasih.
Okay, shall I answer it or address it in Indonesia? Is it fine? Okay, I'm really sorry to Miss Lina for addressing the question with bahasa. Okay, sebenarnya presentasi saya adalah ajakan kepada legal scholars yang ada di Indonesia untuk mulai melihat konten-konten di pengetahuan tradisional, hukum agama, doktrin-doktrin agama, dan menafsirkannya dalam rangka melakukan reorientasi arah pembangunan menuju pembangunan yang lebih berkelanjutan. Karena kenapa menuju ke arah berkelanjutan? Karena kita berada dalam posisi yang sangat sulit, ya, predicament, di mana planet kita mengalami kerusakan yang sangat parah akibat dari aktivitas manusia, dan penyebabnya adalah salah satunya adalah secara epistemologi pengetahuan Barat yang memisahkan antara manusia dengan alam, sehingga manusia beranggapan bahwa ia adalah dominion atau penguasa alam dan kemudian melakukan eksploitasi terhadap sumber daya alam demi kebutuhannya. Nah, ketika kita melihat akar permasalahan ini ada pada tataran epistemologi pengetahuan Barat, maka kita memerlukan epistemologi tanding. Ya, apa epistemologi tanding ini? Epistemologi yang tidak memisahkan manusia dengan alam. Di mana kita bisa temukan epistemologi yang menganggap manusia bagian dari alam, itu banyak kita temukan di ajaran-ajaran agama, ya, kemudian di pengetahuan-pengetahuan tradisional, di kearifan-kearifan lokal, misalkan kearifan Dayak, kearifan lokal Bali, kemudian ada di Sulawesi juga. Nah, ini yang kemudian kita harus jadikan modal untuk melakukan interpretasi, ya, bahwa kita banyak memiliki pengetahuan tradisional yang kemudian bisa kita interpretasi dalam rangka untuk menjawab tantangan antroposen ini. Nah, misalkan teman-teman di Bali mencoba untuk menafsirkan Nyepi, ya, Nyepi yang tadinya merupakan ritual keagamaan, kemudian ditafsirkan ke dalam konteks ecological wisdom, yaitu kebijaksanaan lingkungan, di mana Nyepi dianggap sebagai salah satu solusi untuk mengatasi perubahan iklim. Kenapa? Karena satu hari kita diam di rumah, tidak mengkonsumsi listrik, tidak makan makanan enak, tidak bepergian, otomatis konsumsi energi kita menjadi sangat rendah. Ya, kita tidak mengkonsumsi listrik. Dan ini adalah salah satu kearifan yang kemudian bisa diduplikasi di banyak tempat ketika kita ingin mengurangi konsumsi listrik kita. Nah, di banyak tempat juga, di Sulawesi ada yang namanya salsi, di mana memberikan kesempatan kepada laut untuk mereproduksi ekosistemnya. Jadi ada momen di mana masyarakat nelayan itu tidak boleh pergi ke laut untuk menangkap ikan. Tujuannya adalah memberikan kesempatan kepada ikan untuk bereproduksi. Nah, ini kearifan-kearifan lokal yang banyak sekali ada di Indonesia, ya, mulai dari Sabang sampai Merauke. Dan seringkali dalam konteks keilmuan, kearifan-kearifan lokal ini dipandang sebelah mata. Karena apa? Karena dia dianggap kelas 2 jika dibandingkan dengan pengetahuan Barat, ya, yang saintifik. Nah, padahal pengetahuan saintifik Barat inilah yang kemudian membawa kita pada permasalahan lingkungan, pada permasalahan planet kita hari ini. Dan solusinya adalah melakukan revitalisasi terhadap pengetahuan-pengetahuan tradisional ini, sekaligus juga menjadi alternatif atau menjadi pengetahuan tanding terhadap pengetahuan Barat. Apa fungsi legal scholar atau sarjana hukum? Nah, sarjana hukum memiliki perangkat, ya, memiliki pengetahuan, keterampilan untuk melakukan legal drafting, untuk melakukan formulasi-formulasi norma, ya, penafsiran-penafsiran hukum, yang mana penafsiran-penafsiran terhadap pengetahuan tradisional ini bisa dilakukan oleh para sarjana hukum, dan ketika dia misalkan menjadi legal drafter untuk pemerintah kabupaten, pemerintah desa, pemerintah provinsi, dia bisa memasukkan agenda-agenda pengetahuan tradisional ini ke dalam norma-norma positif yang ada di Indonesia. Dan yang tidak kalah penting, kemudian juga sebagai sarjana hukum adalah bagaimana kita mendorong pengakuan terhadap masyarakat adat yang ada di Indonesia, karena mereka lah yang paling dekat dan mereka lah penjaga ekosistem kita di Indonesia. Mereka penjaga hutan, mereka penjaga laut, yang semestinya status mereka dan keberadaan mereka diakui oleh hukum positif yang ada di Indonesia. Saat ini memang ada peraturan undang-undangan yang mengatur tentang hak masyarakat adat, tapi sifatnya berserakan, ya, acak ada di mana-mana, ya, di secara sektoral. Kita membutuhkan sebuah perangkat legislasi yang bersifat komprehensif, sekaligus juga menjamin dan menghormati keberadaan mereka dan hak-hak mereka. Dengan penghormatan inilah pula pengetahuan tradisional dari masyarakat adat dari Sabang sampai Merauke itu bisa tumbuh dan kemudian bisa menjadi epistemologi tanding bagi pengetahuan Barat. Saya pikir itu. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Bapak untuk pengetahuan barunya. Semoga ini bisa menjadi perhatian bahwa pengetahuan tradisional itu sangat penting keberadaannya seperti itu ya Bapak ya. Baik, baik. Masih kita buka pertanyaan untuk para pembicara kita. Bagaimana? Oke. Diberitahukan kepada seluruh peserta bahwa ada link absensi untuk menerima sertifikat. Bisa dilihat di chat box, di situ ada link untuk presensi seperti itu. Oke, baik. Karena tidak ada lagi pertanyaan untuk para speakers, because there is no question for our speakers today, I think enough for the question and section answer. Thank you very much for the answer and the participation. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we finally come to the end of this section. But before I close the conference, again, I would like to invite all the speakers to give the closing statement, maybe starting from Mrs. Salina, and then followed by Mr. Agung, then the last Mrs. Bunga. Time is yours.
Okay, I will begin. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening and asking the questions. My apologies, I'm not able to deliver the presentation in Bahasa. Not really that good to do it in a formal setting, but I appreciate the questions, and I think concluding remarks would be it's a good topic to discuss when we are talking about the developments in technology and how it I would say influence, impact, and interrupt the society and how humans continue to live in this earth. My contribution to the presentation is to show that apart from adapting to the technological challenges, religious communities and religious leadership has to do, pushing classes online, creating content that are more interactive to get better support and so on. I think apart from the adaptation, it's also important for us to realize that this technological advancement is also disrupting and influencing the way religion is understood, is presented, is observed in the public, and therefore it is important for us to continue look at what are the best practices that we can do to maintain religious harmony within our community in our own context. Yeah, so I think that is all that I can say.
Thank you, Miss Salim. And then Bapak Agung, please.
In Bahasa, right?
Yes.
Oke, yang ingin saya sampaikan sebenarnya bahwa kita sedang berada di sebuah planet yang tidak baik-baik saja. Ya, permasalahan terjadi, ya, tidak hanya revolusi industri 5.0 yang memberikan tantangan kepada kita, tapi juga kondisi planet sekarang juga memberikan tantangan yang tidak kalah besar bagi kita. Dan kemudian sebagai legal scholar, sebagai orang-orang yang concern terhadap isu lingkungan dan juga concern terhadap keberlanjutan lingkungan hidup, kita diundang untuk memberikan kontribusi terhadap perbaikan planet ini. Nah, di sini menjadi penting para scholar yang mendalami hukum adat dan hukum agama untuk mulai melihat material-material yang ada di hukum agama mereka, yang ada di material-material yang ada di hukum adat mereka, untuk diinterpretasikan ulang menggunakan kebijaksanaan lingkungan atau ecological wisdom. Nah, dengan cara inilah kemudian kita bisa melahirkan epistemologi tanding untuk pengetahuan Barat yang bersifat dualistik yang menjadi penyebab kita menghadapi permasalahan lingkungan global hari ini. Dan saya pikir semoga ajakan ini bisa bersambut semakin banyak Bapak Ibu sekalian, para dosen dan juga mahasiswa yang mulai mengalihkan perhatian penelitiannya pada pengetahuan tradisional dan juga pengetahuan agama yang dalam kaitannya untuk mereorientasi hubungan kita dengan alam. Saya pikir demikian. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Bapak Agung. Mrs. Dewi, please. I'm yours.
Iya, iya, bahwa terima kasih atas kesempatannya. Jadi, kalau kita berbicara masalah informasi dan teknologi, tentu saja kita akan berhadapan dengan dua sisi. Di satu sisi, kita bisa memanfaatkan untuk memudahkan kehidupan kita, tetapi memang di sisi lain ada beberapa tantangan yang perlu kita hadapi. Nah, kita berbicara masalah teknologi informasi ini sebenarnya adalah alat yang bagus sekali, penegak hukum yang pintar sekali, itu harus diimbangi, bahkan yang menjadi tombak utamanya adalah bagaimana kita memanfaatkan teknologi dengan baik. Maka kembali lagi bahwa untuk menanggulangi cybercrime, cyberterrorism, atau bentuk-bentuk kejahatan cyber lainnya, intinya adalah bagaimana kita menginklusi menggunakan cybercrime dengan literasi yang baik. Jadi pemahaman terhadap penggunaan teknologi informasi itu sangat penting untuk menanggulangi kejahatan di dunia maya. Baik, demikian yang bisa saya sampaikan pada kesempatan ini. Terima kasih, Ibu Moderator.
Thank you, Ibu Dewi. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please give virtual applause for our speakers today. Okay, thank you so much. We have such productive and inspiring time together, and this event is about to end. But before we apart, please receive this pantun from us. I have pantun. Kalau ada jarum yang patah, jangan simpan di dalam peti. Kalau ada hilaf dan salah, sudilah maafkan kami. So please forgive us for our shorting comings. And finally, I would like to thank you for all the speaker, for informative, interesting presentation, and all the participants for very active participation. Dan once again, please give applause for all the speaker and also for us here. Okay, thank you. Akhir kata, I would like to say wabillahi taufiq wal hidayat. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi Santi Om Sahe. Good afternoon. I will send back to Master Ceremony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Anggi, for leading the keynote session and discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now coming to the end of this webinar. We say thank you very much to the speakers, Mrs. Lina Sakina Salim, BA, Mr. Igusti Agung Wardana, SH, LLM, PhD, and Mrs. Dr. Dewi Bunga, SH, MH, for valuable presentation and fruitful discussion. We do hope we can collaborate more in other educational events in the future. And on behalf of the host and committee, we would like to extend once again our deepest appreciation to you all for your support and participation. And again, thank you and good afternoon. Om Santi 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 Om Sahi wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, salam sejahtera bagi kita semua.
Terima kasih. Terima kasih. Thank you, Lina.
Aktivitas sampai jungkir balik. Yuk balikin kondisi. Airbrand, rasakan kemurniannya.
Terima kasih kepada speakers, Bapak Agung, kemudian para partisipan, Bapak Ibu Dewi Bunga dan Ibu. Salam hangat dari saya dan salam. You're the light and the shadow on the wall when you sleep.
Everything that I need is right here with me. Come to me. All that I can say is already said. I come to you. There's one word that I can't forget. Goodbye, 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 yeah. Little time, not a moment wasted with you. I realized to stay, we had to break away. Come to me. All that I can say is already said. I come to you. There's one word that I can forget. Goodbye, 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 little time, not a moment wasted with you.
Shopee 17 Agustus Festival Pilih Lokal 10 sampai 17 Agustus. Nikmati produk lokal dibuat
Untuk Korea. Kori Chandra. Berani nggak? Kori.